welcome to Weird Wednesday on the Aslandy Show.
Sit down, grab your beer or your soda. Where's my beer? Oh, I'll find it in a sec. I'll find it. It's like, where's my car? I want to make a sequel to Where's My Car called Where's My Car Keys? Because that's a very true-to-life problem.
Or where's your beer, in this case?
With us today, we have the famed, the infamous, the mighty, the curled mustached, Mr. Bournbastic, man of glamour, intellect, culture, and most of all, awesome stories. Welcome, Mr. Bournbastic, to the show.
Hey. Hello. How are you doing this evening?
I'm quite well, and I'm very delighted to have you. I'm super excited. I'm grabbing your camera right now. Let's see if I see a camera.
Do you want me to turn myself on? I will. I'll
turn on yourself on. Oh, I love it. Hello.
Hello.
That hat is amazing.
Oh, wait, give me a minute. Have you seen my goggles? Have a look at these things. Wait for this. I'm fucking putting some steampunk goggles on top of it. Let me get the combo.
Okay, I'm grabbing that right now. I don't know how I missed this.
It's a tricky one.
Window capture.
Yeah.
And it's the one I made for Captain Funk, I think.
Ooh. I'll have to check them out.
I'm
gonna have to check out the previous guests. I'm gonna have to check them out.
All very interesting people.
Excellent.
The most interesting of all is one of the weirdest guys I know. He's a good friend of mine. His name's the ungoogleable Michelangelo.
Ooh. Interesting name.
Of Dutch descent, moved to the United States at a young age, became an artist, musician, poet, writer, thinker. He has a podcast called Self-Portraits as Other People.
Oh, okay.
Where he has guests with odd stories.
Okay, here's something you should do. I there's no harm in doing it. You should try and ask Duncan Trussell to turn up on your show.
Oh, I love it.
I mean, he answers his DMs on Twitter. They're open to him, so email him.
All right, there you are.
Just message him and just be like, "Yo, I do this weird Wednesday thing. I like talking about strange subjects. You're like the king of strange. You want to turn on?" He'll probably say yes. He's a busy guy, but
there's a guy who was on Michael's show who I'm really excited to try and get on the show, whose name is Jason. What is his name? Jason something. He's really cool, and I read a few of his articles. He's a writer. Let's see, where do I want to put you? I'm going to put you here, and I'm going to make me over here. Horsley. Jason Horsley. Jason with a U. Jason Horsley. That guy is far out.
Oh, yeah.
He has a thing called the... I'm blanking on everything right now. It's okay.
I'll look him up.
Yeah. He's super interesting.
All right.
Okay, now I'm going to figure out where to put my camera. I'm going to make it smaller. Put it over here.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I kind of make a new one every time. I should get more...
That's straight. Keep it different. Look, it's Weird Wednesday. Keep it interesting with time, man. Yeah, exactly. It changes. You never know what you're going to get. That's part of the great appeal of the Weird Wednesday.
Yeah.
You keep people guessing.
Exactly. Now, what does this do? Oh.
Oh, cool. I can still do that. Hey.
Oh.
There. Okay. This is fun.
Oh.
So, how was your day?
Good. I mean, I got up late, which happens because I don't have an alarm clock. I just sort of get up whenever my body feels like it, which is normally exactly 20 past 10. I played some chess. Went really well, as ever. Had some fun. My chat got into a slight argument amongst themselves, which happens.
Oh, what about? Drama. Give me the drama.
just drama. Oh, it wasn't even that much interesting drama. It's just people shit talking each other, and then they just begin telling each other to shut the fuck up. And then the other one was being like, "I don't like what you're saying," and I was like, "Man, I let my mods deal with it. They should chill."
I had that in my Discord last night.
Yep, it's lovely. It's really pleasant whenever it happens, and you'll just have to be there, be like, "Yep, yeah." I mean, they're allowed to think what they want. Just don't take it too far, people.
It always kind of catches me by surprise, honestly, because I just don't see it coming. Everything's so peaceful.
And then all of a
peace.
sudden it's just not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, so that went well. We did that, chilled for a bit. Nearly decided to stream on YouTube, but chose not to. Sorted some other bits of work out here and there, and that's really it. I think that's really it. Sort of. It's been a fairly standard chilled day, and then died earlier on stream playing CDDA.
So
a lot.
How is the setup right now? Are you guys open? Are you guys still on a partial lockdown, a full lockdown? What do you guys have for regulations going on?
I think we're still in a full lockdown. I think in Wales, I think we're in a full lockdown. We have been for ages. But in all honesty, it's been so long that I don't really know. Like, my life hasn't really changed since lockdown began. It really hasn't changed. I just sort of like carry on. I go to the shops. I put on a mask, which I didn't previously. I come back. I play games. That's really it. You know, before that happened, I used to like go to an RP club and we used to do playing D&D, but now I just do that online. It's really the only difference, really. And I haven't fenced in ages, so yeah, no real difference. And I used to live rurally, so I'm used to kind of like isolation anyway. So
Yeah,
really no difference.
I suppose I had that at the time.
I think that for me, I think it also helps that I noticed Corona, or I was like really aware of it coming really early, because I'm like obsessive news hawk. I'll watch everything. There's a Discord I follow, and I follow a lot of like the opposite people, which is open source intelligence people on Twitter, whose sole job in life is to like gather intel, which they can find through like news sources and like reports, and then just put it out there before the mainstream media get there first.
Sure.
And the moment that the Chinese said that there was like a respiratory mysterious problem in a fish market,
So who are these alt-right people you follow? No, I'm kidding.
no, most of them are very neutral. The ones I follow are neutral. I know.
It's just the first, like, it's like the first accusation.
Yeah, exactly.
Just regardless of context.
Sounds
all right.
On that, I'll say this now. If you ever want to like see the ultimate Twitter flame war, look up the political Twitter accounts on Pakistan and India, because they shit talk better than anyone else. I think the best like shit talking thing I've seen is an Indian account that they said to a Pakistani account, they went, "You drink camel piss." To which the Pakistanis say, "Well, at least we may drink camel piss, but at least we don't drink cow piss." To which the Indians said, "Well, we may drink cow piss, but at least we don't eat shit." And they were like, "Well, at least we may eat shit, but we don't bathe in shit." And it just kind of escalated.
Yeah, it just gets worse and worse.
It was great. I loved it. But I kept an eye on that there, and I know there was like a weird occasion in like last year where I went down to the local coffee house, and this was just when it was just getting going in China and started more, and I just sat there. I just had this realization. I was just looking out the window, and I was like, in about a month or two, this is all going to stop. And it was this really weird event, because I was just sat there just watching people walk by, a lot of old people and others, and I'm like, you're all just dead, or at least going to be in severe trouble. And it was and just nobody taking it seriously. And it was such a weird, just sort of like day. I mean, I enjoyed the coffee, but I was like, shit.
Yeah. That's I know the only people that I follow that talked about it much way before was like the guy Styx Hexenhammer. You know him?
You follow Styx Hexenhammer.
Yeah.
Styx Hexenhammer.
I like him a lot, but he's one of the examples of someone they say he's like a far right, you know, but he's just not. He just clearly isn't. They don't follow his content.
No. This is the thing. On the political side, we can talk about that if you like. There's a lot of
we can talk about politics here. I've already given up that.
Well, I mean, there's this whole concept of why, like, people view, why, for instance, society leans so far to the left and views anything less left than them as being fairly aggressive. There's a concept by a philosopher called Mancurius Mollberg on what's called the cathedral, and it's the whole idea of why history leans to the left. Why, if you took a conservative politician today and compared them to a conservative politician 50 years ago, the conservative politician today would be further to the left than not. And why we can identify ideas like, if we talk about the concept of transspeciesism, like the idea eventually that you can, transition into a different animal.
Which is like, to some people, that's wacky.
Well, yes. And even though that isn't like a legitimate political perspective now at all,
right?
You can just tell which side is going to support it, and which side is going to.
Well, yeah, I know good examples of that. Now, there's something. So, that's interesting. There's one concept that is people always come around to on this discussion. It's the tolerance paradox, right? Have you heard that before?
Sure.
I feel like that gets brought up with
tolerance.
this.
Popper's tolerance paradox is used as an argument, but it really shouldn't be used as an argument because it's not an argument; it's a paradox.
Right. No, totally.
The issue. People are like, oh, well, if you tolerate intolerance, then you end up being destroyed.
Right.
But the problem is if you use that as an argument and you go, well, I don't tolerate intolerance, and therefore I can destroy you, then the other side can use exactly the same argument and go, well, we don't tolerate intolerance either, and because you're being intolerant, we're going to destroy you. It
but
basically
that's moving the goalpost, right? I mean, I call it moving the goalpost because. What you need to say to be accurate there is that they are physically attacking you. The fact that someone's physically attacking you has nothing to do with whether it's because they're intolerant or not. It's the physical attack, right? So, I don't know.
I agree. I also think that the large part of that, I mean, I spent basically 6 years of my life essentially reading every single day the ideas of both the far left and the right, because I hate tribalism, and I really wanted to approach people on their own terms, and it's a lot easier to talk to people when you actually understand who they've read and the ideas they've got. So I've read a lot of like books from both sides, and I've had civil conversations with basically everyone now.
Yeah, same.
But I understand why people can think certain things of certain people, and it doesn't help that the media likes to simplify things. I agree with some people on what's called like the new right side, although as pointed out by some philosophers, the new right can also be arguably described as conservative anarchist revolutionaries, potentially. But
I mean, there are people with bizarre ideologies.
They very much so are. But they have a view whereby you should get rid of the concept of left and right and replace it with inner and outer. Because the concept of left and right originated in the French Revolution, specifically during whenever the assembly was gathered. And you had the liberals and those who pushed for the revolution who sat on the left. Right. And then you had the royalists who sat on the right. And that transferred into left and right.
I think it's actually a mistake to associate the fascism with right and communism with left in the first place. I think that's an actual mistake. I think they're actually a different axis, right? It's
I would argue so.
Yeah.
They share one or two traits. There's been a lot of work on this analyzing kind of modernity and the issues inherent with those. So one perspective that is very rarely noticed by people when they talk about this is the concept of progressive time. A large part, I think, of the hostility of all of the current major ideologies comes down to how they view history. So, and I've spoken, and it's a really fascinating little thing. So, take the ancient Greeks and the Hindus and the Norse. They all had this idea of a circular system of time and the ages. So the Norse had, for instance, I can't remember the whole name of it, but it eventually went to the Wolf Age, and that was when Ragnarok happens. And then from when Ragnarok ends, it's a rebirth into like the Primal Wave, and it repeats. With the Hindus, it's a concept called the Yugas, which starts with the Golden Yuga and ends with the Kali Yuga, and then it repeats.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that.
With the Greeks, it's the Golden Age to the Iron Age, and then the Iron Age becomes the Golden Age, and it goes around. So the idea in there is history is circular. There's no concept of progress because there's no end. The problem with the idea of progress, and it's such an insidious use of language, is this. It's something noted by Alexander Dugin, who is a philosopher.
I'm familiar with him.
Yes,
like him a
probably
lot.
one of the most dangerous philosophers around, but he points out that modernity, you can use the term progress in the same way you can modernization. To modernize a machine means to make it more efficient, more sort of complex. But one idea that is pointed out by other people is this. In those past times, it tends to be that those religions looked at the past and said, well, there was a golden age where we were in harmony with nature and the universe, and that's paradise, and we have fallen into chaos. Hence, whenever specifically the liberals came about in the 19th century as a result, I think of Kant, and I actually think you can trace down fascism and indeed probably the majority of problems in the West to Kant.
He didn't come up with, because I agree with that. I also, though, you'll notice before him that there was just there's a huge difference between the English mindset and like the the German mindset on a cultural level.
Oh, definitely.
Where I know one good example of that is that in language, like linguistically, in the English language, okay, or the other way around, there's a term in German called, they say this term, "we Germans," and it would be very odd in English to say "we English." You would say "we the English," and it's just it's a different. I think there's actually runs through the differences in the languages. Well, and then on a legal level and a philosophical level, and then start up to Kant and Nietzsche, the whole concept of the Übermensch and all of that certainly comes from that tribal identity and the nationalism that formed out of, is like, I don't think you can separate that 20th century German nationalism from the evolution of their philosophy and language, right?
No, I agree
with what you're saying. I'm just...
We'll come on to that into a second. There's a concept called the Sofia War Hypothesis that talks about this at length, specifically the terms of language. But to finish up this little rant before we go into that, I guess. Yeah. Because I can tell this is going to be a long
This is going on YouTube. This whole thing's going on YouTube right here.
Go for it. I like it. But I love it. But here's the thing: is that whenever the liberals came about, specifically Herbert Spencer, who was a liberal philosopher who came up with the concept of survival of the fittest. If you read Darwin, it's not actually in there, the term. Herbert Spencer's the one who put it. Also sold over 1 million copies. But he held that, and you could arguably trace it back a bit further, but essentially liberals hold that you start off in a state of nature in which life is nasty, brutish, and short. Right. And as we progressed through time, we are moving towards a utopia. This is known as The End of History by a philosopher called Fukuyama, who produced a book last year. The End of History, however, was really well known in the 1980s and 90s.
I remember the term being used a lot, like by McKenna.
And
like the Great
concept...
Attractor.
Yes.
At the end of time. He would talk about that kind of stuff a lot.
And the concept of the end of history is that the liberal order we have now is the final stage of social development. There is nothing else beyond it. There's not going to be communism, there's not going to be fascism, it's going to be a liberal democracy with liberal capitalism that rules forever. And that's the most complex you can get and the most perfect. And there may be some kinks, but that's essentially it. Now, that's an idea what the liberals have. And whenever your perspective is that your philosophy, and this is reflected in policy in what's known as the Washington Consensus, which is the requirements required by Washington to get aid from the United States, which includes liberalization of the economy. But whenever you have that as your view, anyone who disagrees with you is essentially holding back humanity from the closest they can get to perfection. Right. The communists have a slightly different view. They start off with, it was harmony, and then we fell, but now time is going forwards to the workers' utopia. And again, it's a progressive forward movement in time where we progress towards something. The final view, the fascist, is a bit more complex because fascism isn't really one
I've read a few of those books, The Ethical State and Mein Kampf and...
another really fascinating one with difference would be For My Legionnaires, which is an interesting one.
I see a line too, all the way to like from Machiavelli, all the way to that.
Yeah, for sure.
There's certain strains of Western thought that have
I agree.
Gone there.
I agree.
I have some things to say about what you're saying that I agree with, and but to fill it out a bit. One thing I think that's a misconception that's holding people back, or it's sort of lack of understanding, is that conservatism is a branch of liberalism. Like Hobbes, like a Hobbes conservative is a liberal.
We'll talk about that. Sophia War. So to go into the next subject,
basically, in short, because they're working from the same premise and like assumptions.
Yes, largely. I agree with that largely. We'll go around this because here's the thing.
I told you I like Rousseau.
Rousseau's fun. To go into the earlier subject you mentioned about the German language, and then I'll cover
Oh yeah,
We'll cover
sorry,
then
I'm jumping
fascism
ahead.
and it's right, it's right. We'll then cover fascism and its strains, and then I'm happy to talk about conservatism and the sub-strains within that, and the fundamental tension between what I would consider true right-wingism or true conservatism and not. And we can talk then about the probably Sky for Eagles speech would be the best one there. But to talk about the Sophia War Hypothesis, you were talking about how the German language is fundamentally different to the British, the English, and how that leads to psychological differences. So there's a concept in psychology or theory called the Sofia War Hypothesis. Two versions, there's the hard version and the soft version. The hard version has been mostly disproven, the soft version, however, has not, and it's kind of generally sort of accepted by anthropologists and others. But essentially it states that language affects how you perceive reality.
Sure.
And a classic example of this is Old Welsh. So in the Old Welsh language, there was no word or difference between grey and blue. So if you were to do a psychological test with them and you were to pick a painting that was grey and pick up a painting that was blue and ask them if there was a difference between the paintings, they would respond, if they were talking in Old Welsh and that's all they knew, that there was no difference between them. Because they don't have the linguistic framework for even recognizing that difference.
Sure.
It's similar with people who have like time issues. And so it affects reality to some extent and in a fairly fundamental way. But how that, to trace that and how that individually like boils down with,
there's a even less like far out concept, which is simply that your language affects your laws and the meaning of your laws. And I think that is largely at play also. Like you'll see the differences between, say, a German culture and American, where they have hate speech laws in Germany, and it's illegal to wear certain regalia, certain types of dress. These types of laws would actually be unfathomable here. Like the people culturally would not respond well.
I have a lot of envy for you. I'm utterly terrified. I'm utterly terrified about what the Scottish are up to at the moment, for instance.
Yeah, I mean,
the Scottish have
it helps too.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah,
because we have some canaries in the coal mine.
It's true. The Scottish have a hate speech going through at the moment.
I know. Gross offense by electronic communications.
It's worse than that. It's worse. It's the Scottish hate speech bill will let them arrest you.
It's a
and
new
put
one.
You in prison. Yeah.
Hate speech to me is not. Doesn't exist in a legal framework. There is no such thing as hate speech.
Well,
there's hateful speech.
The concept of hate speech originated from the USSR and specifically the Islamic regime of Iran.
Sounds like some cult stuff. It's haram. It's the same as haram, or what's it in Catholicism? Heresy.
Heresy.
Yeah, same concept.
But like their law, here's what makes it so dangerous. Without going into too many crazy details, this is, I think, the most dangerous part of it. That the Scottish are going to make the possessing inflammatory material a crime that can be imprisoned by up to 5 years. Not only will they make it a crime that can be imprisoned by up to 5 years, but they will be able to get you in any part of the UK and force the English and Welsh police, or Northern Irish, to extradite you to Scotland for trial. And what they consider to be inflammatory doesn't require intention. That's what's so nuts about it.
Oh no, that's what in the Count Dankula case, it said in the verbatim in the
you don't need
ruling,
intention,
that context and intent were irrelevant.
They don't matter, which is madness.
The judge, that was his own words.
Yeah, it's utterly madness.
Yeah.
But anyway, to go on to a quick thing, on the fascism front, so it's been pointed out by people like Dugan, but also people along the lines of, again, like the Iron Guard commander, probably is the most interesting, and even Count Kalegi, who was the founder of the EU to a large extent, that fascism really has 3 different substrains, and then there's slightly bizarre ones like the Brazilian fascists or the Israeli fascist movement. But basically they tend to come from 3 strange. You have those that propose the nation as the kind of center of their work. That would be, for example, Italian fascism, Spanish fascism to a large extent. they tend not to care so much about racial components.
Right.
For instance, Mussolini's secretary was Jewish, and they did send the Jews to the Germans eventually, but that was really in the second part of the war.
No,
then
they
you
were
have
into the morality thing.
Yes,
They
and
believed that it was
definitely
the
cult.
state's job to make moral decisions for the people.
All to the state, nothing outside the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they then had
Which is actually
and
like-
it was
It's really similar to theocracy. It's just changing the church to the state, but it's the same.
correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's this brings me on to one of my favorite authors who we'll talk about in a bit on that front, because he used to threaten the Pope with it quite a lot. But then you have the blood people, those who propose race as the kind of drive their thing. And that's what everyone thinks of when they think of a fascist, is the Nazis, those who propose that race and blood are the key, which from an actual traditional right-wing perspective is actually abhorrent, because it's a material component.
Absolutely. Well, any of those things to a traditional conservative, any of those are terrifying, because it's a huge amount of power in the hands of the state with no protections. Because we're talking about some of the most liberal concepts like property rights and rule of law, and things like peace. All of these are disturbed by those.
To what most people would consider conservative, yes. But I will again, we'll get onto that, because diving into that is that's a spicy and interesting subject.
No, I just think though, isn't that as simple as, I may be way off, but isn't that just as simple as people not having taken an interest in what these things are, and so it's just sort of all a Rorschach? Yes. It's all generally a Rorschach kind of thing.
You see your opponents being a fascist, and then they just start. I agree.
You see it's a blob of ink, but it's probably a threat.
Yeah,
it's a threat to your tribe.
Yeah, and then very quickly, and then you have the faith ones, and the only ones I know of that are the Iron Guard. But the Iron Guard was such a bizarre movement in comparison to all other fascist movements of the 1920s, 30s, that it's very hard to put them into a boat. They were a fascinating movement. But so yeah, on to and we'll talk about the fascists and the conservatives now. So to talk about conservatives, it's something that Alexander Dugin has noticed as well, but also people like Scruton, who was a English conservative writer very recently, very well-known one as well. But he pointed this out, as well as Julius Evola and others. But it's funny that there are three forms of conservative. What we consider conservative today is mostly a liberal. They're basically liberals.
With traditional, with traditional values and a the work of Jonathan Haidt?
Yes, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
So he has this sort of map of conservatives having a 5-band EQ of morality, and leftist liberals in America have like a 2-band EQ. It's just a lot less complicated.
Well, yeah.
It's more feel good. Yeah. Like if I had to sum it up, the left today in the U.S. is sort of a hollowed out cluster of feel good aphorisms and general malaise. It's general political malaise that's sort of very kitsch at this point, and sort of it's hard for me to find a way to describe it, but it's like it's a husk of something. It's not really. There's no principles. You won't find any solid principles in the U.S. left today. Like they wouldn't be able to tell you. If they had an opposition to something on principle, even if they knew it in their gut, majority that I know wouldn't be able to tell you directly. You know what I mean? They'd just be like, that feels wrong. But they wouldn't be like, no, that goes against the non-aggression principle or whatever. They wouldn't be like, this is some reason for instance.
Sure. No, I agree. So they are mostly what we consider to be liberals are mostly all conservatives. They believe in capitalism. Most of their ideas are drawn from the 18th, 19th century, mostly the 19th. They hold in a social contract. The difference between... To explain what I'm going to do now, we need to describe some other conservatives. There are two other forms of conservatives, both of which are rarer than the other. There are then the revolutionary conservatives. Most of them are extinct, but they do exist here and there. Most of them died out in the 1920s after the purges in Germany. partly because they disliked the Nazis for trying to overthrow essentially the Kaiser and other such things. And they wanted to fuse the two together. A good example of them would be, for instance, The Worker by... Give me a minute. Worker by German military writer. What's his name? Ernest Jung would be a good example. Military officer whose work was very interesting and very strange perspective overall. Not a Nazi, but definitely not a traditional conservative either, but definitely of the right. So a revolutionary conservative. Then you have the rarest group of all, and probably the true enemy of the conservatives and the left, which are the traditionalists.
Sure.
So the traditionalist movement are very rare, and there's a concept that was talked about by a few people. So in a speech by we'll call A Sky Without Eagles, it was pointed out that the left's essence, if it can have any essence at all, is best described perhaps as a horizontal perspective on life. So what they want to do is essentially spread happiness out as much as they can and equalize things as much as they can. They want to lift the poor up, and simultaneously, the line that's used in the speech is, many a leftist today are the kind of people who would shoot, in order to save one sickly rabbit, would shoot every eagle out of the sky. I don't necessarily agree with that. But
I think there is, though. So I think there's relatively complex ideas from classical liberalism that are actually a little bit, how do you say it? Like, they're not entirely obvious that they're good ideas.
No, for sure.
For instance,
lots of things.
You know, the whole idea of allowing 9 guilty people to go free just to save one innocent life, rather than putting 9 innocent people away to make sure that you get one guilty person. Like, a lot of people on the surface would go for, well, we got rid of the murderer, so, you know, like and I've seen studies behind this, which is a lot of people, when they're making moral decisions, use like pragmatic parts of their brain and pragmatic arguments. Like, for instance, in the trolley problem, they would push the guy off the bridge to stop the trolley, to stop the 5 people from dying, because in their head the math checks out. But I think that sometimes that overlooks the actual visceral part of your imagination that you could use to imagine what it would be like to push a person off of a bridge to their death. And I think when I do that, I'm actually incapable of bringing myself to do it. And so it's like, But that's actually, sort of harkens back to what I was saying about this sort of just feel-good, hollow aphorisms seems to be largely what the left is made of today. It's sort of like nice things to say that make you sound like a good person, when in reality, they betray the truth of your character, and you're not actually being honest. Like,
well, I definitely think that it's very easy to be like, I believe in helping everyone, I believe in this here.
Yeah.
It's very good to essentially appear as a good person whenever things are somewhat, or can be more complex. This thing, I get the motivation. I really do.
Well, I think it's it's laziness too. It's like an anti-motivation, right? Because it's like, part of it might be a lack of challenge, consistent challenge, intellectual challenge. But I don't know exactly where the laziness comes from. Maybe it's the language being stripped down and oversimplified. I think largely there's today a rift between sort of an inherited cultural classical view of humanism, like a Martin Luther King style humanism, that's clashing with a what I guess you'd call critical theory and critical race theory, where they just have completely different views of history, of societal relationships, to the point where they can't you can't even have a conversation. I can't have a conversation with a critical theorist who really believes that that's dogma. I can have a conversation, but they're not very productive.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating. I think, for instance, most people don't know, and if you want to get very spicy, is most people don't know that in the take the Nation of Islam, the NOI. Very big movement to an extent at the time for black rights, very kind of down that route. Most people seem to forget and don't realize that they were explicitly allied at one point with Colonel George Rockwell's Nazi Party of the United States of America.
Oh, yeah.
There's actually a famous picture you can find of three white guys with swastikas on their arm sat in the stadium of the Nation of Islam, as Malcolm Luther X gave a Malcolm X gave a speech. Malcolm X, apologies. And at the time, I mean, they all knew it was weird, but they all fundamentally agreed on segregation. And this is what I think is so interesting and insidious about critical race theory is that it plays on the idea that you are anti-racist by segregating people, even though that is exactly the same outcome that racists want, namely segregation.
Right.
And so it's like, well, we're not segregating because we hate them. We're segregating because we want them to have their own space and for us not to be in there to be an issue for them, and vice versa. But that's the same outcome, even if the motivation is different, to what the racists want.
And
it's
that's
like
the thing.
It's such a weird one.
Going
so
back to what you
weird.
said earlier, I think that there's another group of people that are close to the ones that you said, where it's people who are liberal and just think that that's the be all end all. There's another group of people like me who I'm open to new systems. I just have yet to be convinced by any alternative presented. You know what I mean?
I'll send you one. I'll send you one. In my spare time over the course of the last 6 years, I've written a 56-page document going from the ground up, going from individuals and how you classify them through democracy, political party structures, through the court system, through the government, through the system, how you declare war, through economic legislation, all the way.
So there are elements of classical liberalism that would still
there's everything in
stay intact, sounds like. Because the thing that we get that I like about liberalism is we get some legal language that actually allows us to legislate human rights and hold people to account. And that's actually a relatively new technology in politics.
It definitely is. I mean, again, to go on to finish off a tiny description earlier and talk about it, right? So the final group of conservatives I was mentioning earlier, the traditionalists, they are probably the most fascinating, but also the most alien for people to understand. And there's a writer called Evola, who is by far the most alien. He was widely considered the most right-wing philosopher in the world, probably partly because he intentionally made sure that his own language and own perspective on life was as far removed from modernity as he could possibly make it.
Oh, I like this guy.
His view was far close. There's a quote from him that says, "My views are only those that before the French Revolution, every person with a sensible mind thought was completely normal and sane." A lot of people liken his mindset to being far closer to the ancient Romans than it is today. For traditionalist conservatives, they don't. His issue, he wrote a book called Fascism Viewed from the Right, which is the only book to critique fascism and the Nazis, specifically from a right-wing perspective. And he was tried for being a fascist after World War II, and this is one reason why he's controversial. He hated the concept of race because he thought that race was a materialistic consideration.
Yeah, right.
He was like, you can't judge somebody based on material factors.
That's humanism.
If you could, why should you? Yes.
Essentially.
Yes. He would also disagree with universal human rights, I suspect. But
humanism, well, at least the concept that. See, the difference between what's up, Pyrox? The difference between humanism and anti-racism, as far as I can tell, is humanism considers racism an actual mistake, like an intellectual, a rational mistake, right? Like it's not immoral. It's actually wrong on a logic level, right?
Sure.
Whereas the anti-racist applies a moral lens and like an ethos. A history-based ethos that the other is pure logos, right? But I think there's an element. I mean, there's a lot I'm thinking about right now because now I'm tracing that the term logos was a term in ancient Greek scriptures used for Jesus. And
you're gonna go. Trust me, if you want to go down this route,
there's a discernible lineage of philosophy that comes that stems from Greco-Roman philosophy, from the Judeo-Christian ethos and mindset, culminating in the 1700s and the Enlightenment era, where you have this breakthrough concept where the ability to use reason and logic and ration is a gift from God that the state and the king don't give to you.
Mhm.
That's actually a
Well,
divine gift.
yes.
And I think
This is
that
an idea pointed out.
yeah, that idea is at the center, like, you know, the core value of what I'd call Western liberalism, the English common law and Western liberalism is an individualistic, right? Just that idea that the individual is paramount.
I think that you can trace down the concept, most of the change, if you really want to trace through everything, the Enlightenment and modern democracy downwards, you can trace it to the statement that meek will inherit the earth. That's probably the point at which society began its shift from an aristocratic society towards a democratic society.
Also, people like
personally,
the Stoics, the Greek Stoics, and Marcus Aurelius, but also people like the guy from Athens, Pericles, you know, who started a lot of, like, he put a lot of money and resources into the arts and theater, and like started programs where the destitute and the poor were allowed to enter the theater and watch for free and stuff like that. So that's kind of like that's what I call a progressive idea, right? By our standards.
By the standard, through the lens of going towards a society that is more horizontal in nature, yes.
So we got people. I have to do 10. Why don't you just keep going? I'll keep my headphones on. You keep talking, because I'm really interested in what you have here.
Well, I mean, so Evola talks about how a lot of like traditionally right-wing thinkers have such an alien mindset because they fundamentally believe in a hierarchical society in which you essentially want to focus on a caste system, and they take kind of Plato's view to a large extent, but they base that on the ideas of the Hindu verdict traditions, for instance. They also point out that similar to kind of they think that everyone has their kind of own place. Evola is such a bizarre thinker to talk about, and very hard to kind of talk about with any degree of certainty, because he masks his language and uses it in such a bizarre term. Like, when he was tried for being a fascist, his defense for being a fascist was that he was a super fascist, not a fascist, and therefore couldn't be a fascist. And what he meant by being a super fascist,
so he was probably like mildly autistic, like I am.
No. He intentionally did it. He intentionally did it and very.
Person.
Yeah, but he did it intentionally, specifically because he had disdain for them.
Okay.
And the reason he said he was a super fascist is he liked using the ancient terminology for what super means. Super as in over or beyond. So when he said that he was a super fascist, he actually meant he was above or beyond fascist. He wasn't a fascist. He had transcended it.
That super means above.
And so for him, an anti-fascist would still be a super fascist. Yeah. They are somebody who does not care for fascism.
Right.
And the only reason he cared for fascism, he would say that the state shouldn't be able to influence everything. Partly because there's an agreement between not the state and the people, but more like the government and the divine. Because for him and a lot of traditionalists, the divine is like such an important and critical element to how everything operates. Like, I would have to, if we were to talk about this in depth, I would have to return and actually like detail what I wanted to say in a lot. But yeah, because it's such a hard concept and subject to speak about. I have read an awful lot by him and others, and the thing is that his perspective isn't even political. It's not political. It's not cultural. It's tied in with
it's spiritual.
The concept
it sounds
of
like
magic. Yeah, it's tied in with spiritualism, culture, to an extent, the occult and how he perceived that, and like how, because he took a lot of like Roman ideas, whereby there was a concept in Rome of the divertio, whereby they would sacrifice a general to induce a kind of like spirit of victory in the troops. And so he talks about how, like, being a king, you have inherent responsibilities, because you yourself have a power within you that transcends the mundane. But anyway, going to that their view on, like, they disagree with capitalism because they think that capitalism puts it's not that it necessarily is a bad thing, but it's that it puts matter above value.
Right.
For them, what matters is that the state shouldn't do what is economic. The state should do what is right from like a predetermined transcendental thing, which would probably be, in their view, making society more aligned with the divine.
Right.
And where hence capitalism places all the value system on the economic worth. And suddenly people stop becoming beings that have this organic relationship with the state, and it becomes a contractual relationship that's based on nothing but economic gain. It reduces people to numbers, fundamentally. And it's similar to what the communists say, it's just that the communists have a completely different view. The communists say, well, that's a bad thing, and for those reasons, but we want to move towards a society where everyone is equal. From the perspective of Evola and the traditionalists, though, an equal society is unattainable, and also they would say that you don't want to attain it, because if you had an equal society,
it sounds like a prison.
If there's an equal society, there's no differentiation.
Right. So that's what's so weird to me is I hear people say stuff like that, and I just don't know how that sounds good.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't. Yeah, you can't advance. You can't advance. You can't distinguish yourself. There's no unique traits. You cannot ever achieve anything yourself and be like, this is my achievement, because that puts you above others. A truly equal society is one in which everyone is stripped of their individuality. Hence, a truly hierarchical society
is one where I can tell you to fuck off. Or, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
And he can tell me to fuck off, so it's equal. We're equals. But that's it. There's no other part to it. I don't owe you anything. This whole idea that you owe someone you've never met some special consideration is again, it's just dishonest.
Yeah.
I don't think it's genuine.
I agree. And this is another really fascinating little consequence of having that viewpoint, that you want true individualization, and what you want to do as a person is align yourself with something beyond being human or matter. A vertical perspective on life is take Storm of Steel by Ernest Junger, or you could look Metaphysics of War by Evola. The closest example of this would be Bushido. Is the concept that if your lord commands you to kill yourself, you should kill yourself. Because a samurai's greatest act of devotion and greatest symbol of it is a complete disdain of their own life. Because by doing that they have kind of transcended the concept of matter.
Well, and for the
right wing, it is as well. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's fair to call it something divine. If you consider divine just simply the ability to achieve that which is normally outside of human attainability, like a miracle.
It's a heroic mindset. It's definitely a heroic mindset. It can. I think with
quote.
Plato.
There's a quote of Bushido. I can't remember which guy said it, but it was Bushido is to know death, and it's to know that given the choice between life and death, you choose death. And there's no other reasoning. I love that line at the very end. He said there's no other reasoning.
Yeah.
That's a great quote.
It is.
But I actually agree with that, even as a non-Bushido. I don't identify as a Bushido.
No. Have you ever encountered the works of Yuki Mishima? Or Yuki Mishima? I can't pronounce his name.
Maybe just in passing.
He was an author who wrote a series of books called The Sea of Fertility Tretology. He would have been given the Nobel Prize for Literature, but he was considered too young at the time. His works concern mostly the conflict between new and old Japan, but he had a beautiful quote, and his death is so fascinating. But he always said that to know but not to do is not to know at all. And his view on life was that he believed in the old ways, and he believed he was like a weakling when he was a kid, and then he always looked up to the samurai. And so as a writer, he wrote a book called The Sun and Steel, in which he was talking about how, as a writer, he used to spend a lot of time on paper and sat down, but he also wanted to be a samurai. And so to become a samurai, he began doing bodybuilding, and he began dedicating himself to the sun and to the steel, Itoji weights. And he became the perfect fusion between steel, the sun and the nocturnal moon, and creativity and not. But at the end of his life, he was like, look, I've done everything I can as an artist, and even though I write about the conflict between new and old Japan, it doesn't it's not living up to my true principles. So he decided to found his own paramilitary militia of students called the Harmonious Shield Society.
Cool. So he's like a regular old Hassan E. Sabah, huh?
Yeah, he then launched a coup against the Japanese government. And in 1960 or 70, he went to an army base with some students, took over, tied up a general, went on a megaphone and read a speech out to the assembled generals, in which he told them to throw off their shackles and join him in restoring the empire, and they all said no. So then he went to a nearby room and committed seppuku and wrote his death poem. In accordance with his views. And a lot of people think that he knew he was going to lose, but he wanted, as he said, to do, and thus to be able to say that he knew. And if he hadn't done that, he would never be able to say. Yeah.
Is that the one where you take that short sword and you stab yourself, and then you have to cut out your cut a box in your torso?
Yes.
Or whatever.
Yes.
No, it's a cross. Yeah. It's up and down and then the other way.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's nasty.
But I would really recommend, not just from if you're interested in politics, but just as a work of literature, the Sea of Fertility Tretology and Sun and Steel is one of the most fascinating books.
I did enjoy
he gave
Sun Tzu's Art of War.
Sun Tzu is fun. Yeah, Sun Tzu is fun. But anyway, that's
Hey, I think there's some right-wing ideology in Sun Tzu's Art of War too, honestly.
Maybe. To deviate slightly though, covering this, I'm happy at some point to come up with, because I wasn't expecting this conversation to go down this route. To be honest,
it could have gone anywhere. That's how I never even know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I've read so much on this subject, and even though it's very scatterbrained, the problem is that once you read into it enough, it gets so crazy because you're well. It all starts with how you view history, and then you trace it to the Enlightenment, and then you trace that back to Jesus, and then you're okay, well, the true right-wing perspective is vertical and horizontal, and what does that mean? And then you talk about the essence of the left and the right, and that brings you on to ideas that the one concept proposed by a person called not Carl Mundus, it's I can't remember his name, but he basically says that the left-wing purpose is to eradicate social institutions that are no longer needed. That the purpose of the left is to be entropic.
That's the opposite of what they do now.
Well, they're trying to tear down the system.
In the US, all they do... okay, but by, overburdening it with social programs you can't pay for. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, that...
Because they're just building up the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that depends on who you're talking to, and there's also accelerationists.
Here on the West Coast, that's the MO. That's just the total normal.
For instance, there's...
If it's not working, throw more money and more policies at it. It's never is it working, or anything like that.
I would say the Democrats are fairly central. If you look at, on the other hand, Antifa and BOM, for instance, they're a fascinating little mix.
I know them well, because a lot of my people I actually know are part of that world.
Yeah, I mean...
people I knew growing up, being from Seattle.
Yeah. Here's the thing, is that BOM have a perspective that is fundamentally communistic. The actual founders of BOM, I can't remember the two of their names, but they are avowed Marxist-Leninists. So they want to put their policies forward and change the system.
I know a couple of those. I know a couple of those people.
They're vanguard.
Adrian Carbo, which is the Portland chapter leader, and then another girl. I knew them. They're people who have me blocked at this point, but I do know them in real life.
Yeah,
it's just
and then you have
they didn't want.
And then you have Antifa. I'm sorry to hear that. I am sorry to hear that. I think it's really unfortunate.
I've burned so many bridges over that stuff, but it's kind of helpful. I don't know, honestly.
Yeah. I think that George Washington was right in that there should never have been political parties. George Washington proposed and pushed initially for there to be no political parties, and he was totally right.
I think it was a good idea.
He was totally right.
He actually didn't get his wish.
No. But if you compare them with Antifa are anarchists.
They're anarcho-communists.
And they actually disagree.
They're anarcho-communists.
Yeah, they completely disagree.
And actually,
BOM are well, we want to put candidates forwards, and Antifa destroy the system.
So a fun fact, real quick. You might find this fascinating. I still can't quite fathom it. I know people because I lived in Portland for about 3 years. I know people who are very nice people, very good and smart people too, who are very sympathetic towards Antifa.
Sure.
But one thing that's interesting to me is some of these people, I've tried to just give them some background on the group and what their ideology is, what they stand for. And a couple of these people, very well-meaning, very intelligent. When I've told them, here's the flag they fly. This is the red and black flag that's cut diagonally. It represents anarcho-communism. This is what anarcho-communism is all about. They actually don't believe me. They think I'm making it up. They're like, no, they're not anarcho-communists. I'm like, no, they like will tell you with no hesitation that they're anarcho.
Have you ever seen the video? Have you ever seen the video by? Let me just find his name real quick. Absolutely subversive. It is the video by Yuri Bazimov. Have you ever seen the video by Yuri Bazimov?
He's the one who explains the KGB mission he was on in Canada.
Yeah, but there's a
Yuri
wonderful
was
quote
right.
in it where he goes.
I've seen Yuri was right t-shirts.
Yeah, the thing is where he says they'll never be able to tell the truth. There's a quote where he goes, not only does he mention social justice, but he talks about how he says that there'll come a point where even if you show people facts, they won't agree with you. And they won't be able to distinguish between what is real and what is not real.
Here's why I have some healthy skepticism about that particular guy, though. There's the only reason.
Oh, yeah,
It's because George Orwell was able to tell you all the same shit, and he wasn't a KGB agent.
No, I agree. Yeah,
you know what
I agree.
mean?
And
I don't know that guy isn't just peddling. Now, I don't think he's lying. As far as,
but I don't think it's so revolutionary. Yeah, I understand.
I don't know whether to believe that he was actually a agent who defected. He could easily just be a Russian who wanted to move to the U.S. and make money telling his story. You know.
True.
I don't know. Does anyone ever confirm? Did we get the Kremlin to confirm that guy is?
I think the U.S. have, but whether or not you could trust the U.S. is another question. I mean, on that front, there, the U.S. Propaganda wins are all something the U.S. was for.
Most of our propaganda is for sale, and we sell it to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And,
oh yes, I mean
China.
On this subject here, if we to deviate off this slightly, so we can like
totally just jumped off
no. If we want to go, no, we can go to segue because I said I agree with you. All I'm saying is that I agree with you that there's this confusion aspect. I don't think the internet's helped. I don't think the internet's helped on that front there. I think people are scared to say what they think, and I also think it's very easy to go into echo chambers, and I think a lot of that is a huge problem, which we don't know how to deal with evolutionary. But to deviate this here slightly, and because I've decided I'm going to return on this podcast at some point, and we'll talk about all of this shit. We'll talk about all of this stuff in depth, and I'll break it down into sections, and
they're going on YouTube too, because this is some of my most interesting content that comes.
Sure, I'm perfectly fine with that. But
good.
To talk about this here,
the zero revenue, we'll split it.
I know, right? But take this for instance. You want to talk about the US and propaganda. So if we talk about the US and the 1960s and how strange things got then, I mean, you know presumably of MK Ultra.
Oh yeah. I'm a real conspiracy guy.
And you know, cool. So there's MK Ultra. MK often is a less well-known conspiracy theory.
Know about it.
I
also read all the CIA documents. Actually, I have some of those newly declassified CIA documents right here for us. If you want to look at them later.
And you've read about the Finders cult and stuff. Ooh,
and I have the remote viewing ones, and I have the whatever their magic they're working on. I don't know what to call it.
Yes. Have you ever read? Have you ever listened to Coast to Coast AM?
Oh yeah. That's like, I'm from here, so I actually used to listen to that on the radio, like waves.
That's right.
At night, you know?
Yeah, Ghost to Ghost AM.
Oh yeah.
Halloween version. Best stuff. 100% best radio. Okay, so...
Dude, I love that show. It'll be like...
Yeah, I was just on the porch and I saw like a UFO going by. I thought maybe it was like an angel at first. It was like Archangel Gabriel, but no, it was her. I mean, what do you think, Bob? Do you think
it's so funny, dude?
I just like when you interview Terrence McKenna.
Yeehaw, just saw one fly by, baby.
I liked it when he interviewed Terrence McKenna, and he was like, so how are you doing today here, Terrence? And he was like, well, I'm stood outside my house staring at a volcano on the side of a mountain. And he was like, of course, Terrence, of course, yes. How's the volcano in Hawaii? And it's just so fat. Also, that was a beautiful, if you never heard it, he did like a final interview with Terrence McKenna. It's really heartbreaking.
I haven't.
Because Terrence McKenna at that point knew he was going to die. And he like broke down in tears, telling being like, you're one of my best friends, and I'm really sorry that I won't be coming back on your show again and things. And it's so tragic because he doesn't know how to like handle it either.
He was really saying that weed was gonna help save his life for a long time, and it just never did. He was like, if you smoke weed he's like, I can't die. I smoke weed every day. I remember that, Terrence. I was like, Terrence, it's not gonna work, dude. I'm down. I'm with you though.
No, man.
I'm gonna smoke weed every day too.
Smoke weed every day. But
I'm not gonna pretend it's gonna save my life.
Oh yeah, Cyberpunk's dropped. I forgot about Cyberpunk dropping.
Oh yeah,
But,
that's another thing we can talk about is the
we'll
extension
get
of
onto that.
the extension of
Go ahead.
Gamergate into 2020.
Oh, we'll talk about it in a second. But
Okay.
like, yeah, I'm fascinated with conspiracy theories and also with how those have interacted. So do you know anything about John Dee?
Oh yeah,
There's
I have a couple
John
of his
Dee.
old books, like really old, super old ones.
So have you ever read a book called The John Dee and the Empire of Angels?
I have not read that book. No.
Okay. A really fun one I would recommend as well is read the band that burnt $1 million, the KOF. Because the KOF were a band. I'll go into John Dee in a second. But the KOF were a band in the UK who were involved in the rave scene in the 70s and 60s. But their story involves a load of random stuff. It involves the Kennedy assassination.
Him through, what they call England's Hidden Reverse. Do you know what that is?
No.
It's like the band Coil, and Coil, Nurse with Wound, Current 93. All those weird like gothy industrial electronic bands from England.
Yeah.
I found out about John Dee through them.
Probably highly relate to this then, because it's the KOF's story, and then we'll go into John Dee because I'm fascinated with that. But they were bands that burned
Then we gotta go through
$1
the OST also.
And they have they will go for the OST, and they don't know why they burned $1 million. But they arranged at one point in the 1990s, they flew a load of music journalists out to a Greek island at midnight, where they paid like hundreds of thousands of dollars to have like a fake ceremony set up where they announced the return of Atlantis and the Illuminati.
Nice.
They also sacrificed a sheep, they were taken to the British Music Awards, BAFTAs, I think it was, and they were basically meant to perform there. And they really hated this because they were like, the music industry has made us officially part of them. So one of the lead artists wanted first of all to sacrifice an elephant to them live on stage to terrify them. But their manager found out about this and so was like, do not let them have an elephant. So then they eventually decided he wanted to then cut his hand off live on stage and throw it at the audience. So they was like, don't let him have any knives. Eventually they sent a dead sheep to them at the after party with the words, "This sheep died for your sins" written on it. And then they drove their van off a cliff and then burnt $1 million. But they are fascinating because their story, when you look into it, ties into the Kennedy assassination, the Illuminatus trilogy, the Chaos Mages, Doctor Who, like loads of really wild stuff. And also like a rabbit that they kept on like seeing in album covers and they thought was talking to them.
Do you think that?
But
do you think there's anything to the idea that like sometimes the conservatives have a little bit of a point when it comes to like restraining the excesses of namely like hedonism, but also selfishness and like a materialism and all that. Because do you think
Plato said, right? It's
I guess my real question is, do you think there's an element to that kind of insanity that like actually just comes from a lack of structure, like a lack of cultural and traditional structure? Or do you think
there's a distinction to be...
I don't know.
I think there's a distinction to be made between what I would consider mental instability and intentionally invoking archetypes. I think that Jung, for instance, would probably say that they were intentionally invoking ideas and concepts that drove them to extreme states.
He would say it was largely unconscious.
Yes. Well, Jung is an interesting one we'll talk about as well.
That's my only expertise is Jung, because I've read everything he wrote.
Have you ever read the Red Book?
Yeah. When it came out, sometimes.
You've read the the non-abridged version.
The big one. But I mean, I can't read I can't read the I mean, I just looked at the pictures. I can't read all the text on it.
I would really recommend you read this book here, which is Katafruk by Peter Kissling. Because he talks about how Jung's Red Book, Jung had like two perspectives on life, and he intentionally pretended to be a scientist whenever he was like
he was a mystic. He was a mystic.
Yeah.
Actually, I have an idea for a hair metal band called Swiss Mystic, and it's named,
I like it. I like it
for Carl Jung.
I like it, but anyway, and we'll get onto the like invoking. We're slowly getting around to psychedelics. Don't worry. I'm slowly working us in that direction. But on the John Dee front, John Dee, to tell you a story, was an English magician. He was the court philosopher, or the court magician to Elizabeth, and he essentially, Elizabeth, whenever they found America, wanted an excuse for the British to invade it.
Mm-hmm.
So he said to her that, well, these ancient Irish myths of them going to a land far out in the west, and that gives us a claim on there because the Irish went there and the Irish are ours, and that's we can form a British Empire. So he originated the term British Empire. Now, later on, this goes forwards in time, and various things happen. Kelly's work, for instance, is fascinating. But the next person of interest who kind of picks that up is Crowley. And Crowley essentially decides that even though he wants to call himself the Antichrist, he wants to do that because he wants to bring Jesus' return.
Well,
he wants to.
Don't skip the Freemasons.
He's like, well, the Freemasons are cool as well. Don't get me wrong.
Well,
but
because they were into that same stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Merlin.
Oh,
They
yeah,
all wanted to
100%.
be Merlin, dude.
Yeah, 100%.
The crazy thing is it goes all the way back to the original OG Hermes, the original Hermes Trismegistus. Unknown
Hermes
time.
Trismegistus, yes.
That guy just
Hermes
he
Trismegistus, the Emerald
transcends
Tablets,
time. No one even knows when this guy was alive. It's just
Correct.
He's kind of like a super Jesus.
Well done. Very few people I know of Hermes Trismegistus and von Hohenheim Bournbastic and things. Yeah, no, very good. Also known as Perseus. Well done. So, do you know about Jack Parsons?
Don't forget Thoth.
And how that ties? Yeah, and Thoth. Yes, of
Same
course.
dude.
So, do you know how that ties to NASA's rocket fuel program?
No, I don't. Now that's a leap.
So, Jack Parsons was one of the founders of NASA's rocket fuel division. Specifically, he sort of set it up, but he also at the same time ran a house for artists and other people. One of his guests at one point was L. Ron Hubbard, for instance, and both him and L. Ron Hubbard attempted to birth the Antichrist and the Whore of Babylon with one of their friends, and they did an orgy ceremony known as the Great Working that produced, according to them, an uptick in UFO sightings. But they tried to create the Antichrist and to end the world, and it was all because they wanted the return of Jesus and to bring paradise in there. But they did that there, and this all leaked to NASA eventually, who were like, okay, this is fucking insane. And so they kicked him from the program. And then Jack Parsons ended up blowing himself up, making rocket fuel in his shed. Interestingly as well, the other influence John Dee's had on the world is that the founder of the Blitzkrieg, which was a British general, also got the idea of the Blitzkrieg from a vision he had doing an Enochian working, or dream, I can't remember which, in which the angels told him to use tanks in a certain fashion. And then he translated that. It's wild.
See, I've had mystical experiences. I've had visions. I've heard voices. A few times here and there, different, not always the same. But when it comes to that stuff, like trying to burr the creature, I just think that just sounds like 99% these people are just delusional. You know what I mean? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm very skeptical of that kind of stuff. I have read about in the moment of death, people who have like meditated their whole life, who are ascended masters, are able to go off and reincarnate into a baby and find a baby to put themselves in. And I also have heard about that guy, Egyptian, really tall dude. What was his name? Akhenaten. Akhenaten apparently was, according to their myth, he was reproduced without physical sex. They used the this ankh. You know that ankh? It's like a resonant. It's like a tuning fork, basically. It was supposedly a resonant device where you could psychically have sex, and you're holding this thing in your region. And he's supposed to be at birth through that, kind of similar to a lot of divine, what's that called? Conception.
Sure.
Immaculate.
Sure.
Sorry, that's the word. Immaculate conception.
Sure.
And
sure.
He was supposed to be 12 feet tall or some shit, and or 10 feet tall.
Well, the concept, the whole thing with the giants.
He's
in ancient,
huge.
Stories are really interesting.
But it's funny because they have these statues of the guy, and he has a bunch of people around him, and they're all look like midgets, because this guy is humongous. Now it could just be their artistic liberties. Who knows? But I don't know whether to take him at face value. I mean, maybe the guy was 10 feet tall. I mean, who am I to say who he wasn't?
Well, it's a myth. It's a myth you find commonly throughout all different areas.
I like the Anunnaki
is that the concept of giants and like and how specifically, if you actually look into it as well, it's actually even more weird than that. Not only do most ancient myths talk about giants, but if you really look into it, they oftentimes talk about how the giants used to live in the north, in the polar regions, which is why in Dugan's work he talks about a difference between the polar, the north, and the Atlantic south, or Atlantis, with the west. This is also commonly done in China. This was noted, and it gets even more fascinating. Like Quetzalcoatl in the Amazon was a figure who came across from the west in a boat, gave them ayahuasca, and then went off back to the north on his boat. And it's just like weird things like that there. And like Graham Hancock, who's like a kind of he makes some weird claims here and there, but he's noticed that in some myths he found like a item that is like a specific dagger on like some depictions of like a Celtic god that is identical to depictions on either Quetzalcoatl or another one of the like ancient gods. And it's like really like unusual because it's essentially the same item. He's like, isn't that a bit weird?
You find these parallels. I mean, all of the continents were connected at one time, and actually a few times. I've had the privilege of spending time in Masonic libraries. And there are books that you cannot find anywhere in the world in there. And many of them are about history, world history, and geography. And they talk about Mu and and Atlantis and all of these continents as a matter of fact. Like, it's not even hypothetical. It's like an encyclopedia with maps and all kinds of stuff.
I think the really good quote from him has always been Hancock's, "We have a society that has forgotten more than we remember." And I think that's a very true statement.
I like that.
So, I mean, I don't know, like, I agree with you. We've covered John Dee, we've covered that there. I think, again,
we have
fascinating subject area.
My library has a couple super old John Dee, like, tomes that I never open. But they're ancient. I mean, they're from they're like original.
The really like crazy one is the Liber Ligoth. So the Liber Ligoth was one of the tablets that was transmitted to Kelly. It's a string of numbers and letters, but the weird thing about it is that people have tried to translate it through the years, and other like occultists have tried to like use the same techniques. And every time they contact like the EEs, the Enochian entities, if they exist or not, like they get that perception. So let's just say that they do for the sake of it. But they've always been told that no. They've always been told, no, we're not telling you, the time's not right. It's like,
I've had a lot of experience with ghosts and crap, and I always wonder how often people are actually just being trolled by like spirits.
Sure.
I think that actually does account for some of it, because I feel like, so I've only had 2 mystical experiences that I can say, I don't know, where maybe like, I'll give you a few of them, just in quick low detail. I've had 2 times that a woman came to me, a female voice, so auditory hallucinations, I could hear her speaking, and I was taken on sort of an astral projection out-of-body experience the first time, and the second time was similar, but it was a lot more imagery. And actually, I don't know if you've seen my like slideshow thing, but that the toroidal hypersphere, what that looks like.
Sure. Yes.
So she basically showed me that shape, and kind of explained that everything in the universe was made of this shape. It's like of a higher dimension, like it's a multi-dimensional shape. And so I've had a couple of those. I had one where right the day before that, I was smoking a J out on the porch when I was visiting my grandparents, and I thought I saw. You ever seen a predator? You know, Predator?
Yes.
So I saw like, not like that shape, but like a regular humanoid kind of shape, but like wearing some kind of camouflage thing or something that where the light, like you could barely see it, but I could kind of see the light bending around the thing. But I just thought nothing of it, but I was hanging out with my grandparents' cat, and he was looking at the thing, and he started hissing at it like crazy and like got mad. So it's like, oh, okay, probably is something there. But so that at that moment, I got freaked out and I ran inside their house. And then I accidentally left my bag of weed out on the table on their porch. And I think that whatever this thing was, laced my weed or something.
Wanted.
Because
Interesting.
the next day I smoked a spliff, the first one of the day, and I had this like visionary experience. But the property is also haunted. And I've done like a couple seances at the property and interacted with the ghosts.
Fascinating.
Then, other than that, though, it's mostly been discernible either like a poltergeist type thing, or what I call an apparition, which is not a conscious thing at all, but it's it's stored memories inside wood usually.
Sure.
Almost only wood. I don't know why exactly that is. And I think different, certain people can just like have like a projector where you can read it just like you would, or you can watch it like a movie, kind of.
Sure.
And you'll see someone moving around or moving items about, or like mocking some kind of action, but it won't be it won't be someone who will respond to you. Whereas other ones, ghosts I've had, where they will respond to you, like they'll knock on objects like a certain number of times or at a certain frequency. Being a musician my whole life actually is part of why I started to notice this stuff, because there would be certain types of music I would play that would make like the ghosts happy, more or less, where their activity goes way down. And,
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know, that's just a general frame. I've had a lot of sort of mystical. My first was I was 4 years old with my mother and her boyfriend at the time out at my great-grandparents out near Idaho in the middle of nowhere, 100 acres, and we all awoke to the sound of tribal drumming and chanting. And when we went out to look out the window together, the moment we looked out, it became, and the sound transformed, it was a circle of coyotes howling outside the window. And there's a famous guy that our city, Seattle, is named after, Chief Self, who in no uncertain terms said that his people were going to like fuse their spirits with that of the coyote and the raven to watch over this land. Until the white man is extinct, basically, until they kill themselves off. And,
that's fascinating.
So yeah, it's just that I've had a whole life of either ghosts. The only other ones I can think of is I had a lost time experience. It was about 45 minutes. I have a witness. I was driving in a car and it just straight up is off the clock.
What got you? So did your interest in the sort of paranormal and or like the more mystical and strange, did that all originate, do you think, from those like early like childhood experiences?
Well, it definitely had an influence in that my mind was open.
Sure.
To that there are other like planes of existence, other levels of dimensionality, which coincide that we're not able to see. I think also
fascinating.
I've always loved dreaming and have and sort of taken an interest in the dream world, and so found those kind of that there are certain parallels in how we influence our world around us in the waking world, even though it's not quite as direct or like perceivable as it is in dreams. There's an element of I've learned a lot about that actually through the game I wanted to play with you, Jeu de Tarot, but also other games of chance like cribbage, doing tarot readings, anything with dice, things that are games of chance, namely cribbage. I've learned a lot about that kind of stuff. I can get into a trance state where I think my record is really good. It's probably like 30 out of 35 of picking a card and cutting to that specific card.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it's like I've had a natural inclination. I think probably mostly because of music, though, more than anything.
Sure.
Because of hours.
That's interesting.
With a guitar,
Yeah.
When you're laying down in bed and strumming the guitar in in a room alone, and like the vibrations sort of are bouncing off the walls and everything. I think a long time of repeating that also. Just where there's a vibrational, I don't know, like sonar. You call it like a sonar.
Sure.
But yeah, so then, and then those weird, obviously psychedelics, that segues into psychedelics. I mean, growing up here in Seattle, we have a strain called psilocybe cyanescens, which grows naturally all over the city. And so I would pick those mushrooms a lot, starting maybe age 14, 15, and eat them fresh. And then by 17, I was growing cubensis in terrariums in my room.
Wonderful.
So
that's you're very like I rarely encounter somebody who has such an interest in these things, but also such personal experiences themselves. I very rarely have encountered somebody with such sort of interesting experiences. That's very interesting, and the fact that you've also had like access to like the Masonic libraries, as you were saying, and things.
Yeah.
That's incredibly interesting to me. I for me, in terms of like the tarot and things, I've not so much used the tarot, but I have encountered or used the I Ching before.
Oh yeah, I've experienced. I love I Ching. Yeah.
Yeah, I find the I Ching very interesting.
I mean, it's very similar.
It is. So like, I don't know, like, on my own side on the history front, if you want me to go over that, or like, what would you? Do you want me to? Or do you want like, do you have anything?
Share
else,
with
or, like,
me all your interesting little. You have a lot of interesting. You're a very
All
cool
right.
guy to talk to, man. I'll just say it that way.
I'll go over my history with psychedelics. I've done it before on stream, but I can do it again. It's not a big problem. Because everything I think centrally ties around that to an extent. But so like my interest in psychedelics and sort of spirituality, I think originated when I was at secondary school, which is high school for you guys.
Okay.
And that was there was specifically an RE class, religious education class, where I remember the teacher mentioning how she was talking about it was apologetic philosophy or theology. I can't ever pronounce the first name, but the idea that you cannot describe the absolute because it is beyond. It's
Sure.
not
The ephemeral.
it's one thing. Yeah, so you can't actually
Or
describe
the liminal. What is liminal?
liminal is in between things.
No, that's what I
yes.
mean. Well, sorry, I didn't mean it as a question. I meant what is like
Yes,
like Jeopardy.
Yes. And so that got me really fascinated because I was like, well, if you can't describe something, you can only describe what it's not. And all these mystics talk about how they can't explain their experiences. You have to experience it yourself. Then to understand them, I need to experience these things. And at the time, I was reading Aldous Huxley's Doors to Perception. And I've never been able to find the quote, but I always think that it's from there, but it might be. I'd have to read the whole thing again. But there was a quote I remember which got me really interested in things, and it was this person who was tripping, and they said that the table became the apocalypse. And I really wanted to know what he meant by that. Because beyond just saying that, there's not much you can gather from it. So
I know how I would interpret that from a psychedelic lens. Have you ever done Salvia Divinorum?
Oh
The
yes, I would
extract?
now. Yeah, I would now. Yeah.
Have you done it?
At the time, yeah, I've done it.
The extract, they're like one of the strong ones.
Yeah, times 10.
So
I think it was
when I
times
did
20.
that a couple of times, I had a very painful experience where everything became two-dimensional and I was flattened. Like I lived in a flat world.
Oh, flat world.
So it could have been something like that.
Maybe.
I don't know. That's my own psychedelic. If I had to draw a psychedelic
Interesting.
parallel,
Yes,
that one
yeah.
sucks, dude. You don't want that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
2D
like,
world, and it's
get
not like
like-
in your mind. Like it's physical. Like you can
No, I
feel it, which is not
Yeah.
fun. You don't want to be
agree.
crushed. But it's so interesting that it's like that was actually one of the first looks I had into the idea that we sort of project a sort of hologram around us. That is like a vesicle. I like that word.
Yeah, so it's the concept of Maya, or the German term for it in
Or a,
pragmatic philosophy is
what's the Hebrew? Markaba.
Oh, the Saphir.
The
I
Markaba,
did-
right?
oh,
A geometric shape that
sure.
surrounds a human being. You know,
Sure, yeah.
energy, any source of energy, or whatever.
Sure.
Magnetism.
Sure. And yeah, sure. And
Some weird shit, man.
I agree. So, I got that then. I chose to do Samperdo Cacti, which was
Okay.
Central Key. And
Okay,
so
I know that one.
I sat down. We blended it, froze it, did the whole works. And
I'm
this
sorry.
was when
How
I
old
was
were you?
16, 17.
Okay, you said secondary school. That's right.
And I sat there and I began meditating. As it came on, I got this. This was probably the lightest experience I've had, probably, but also we'll go over it. But I was sitting there and I got this. My mind emptied out and it was filled just with. It was like I'd entered into this like empty space, and there was just infinite love. And it's really hard to describe it because it's all well and good saying it felt like infinite love, but the problem is that the concept of infinity is not really an emotional concept, but there was something about this experience and the emotion I was feeling that conveyed the abstract idea that it was there, it was always there, and it would always be there. And all you had to do was just look to find it. and it was this perception of just infinity transformed into a emotional reaction, and it was very fascinating. Very
Are you
fun.
familiar with the Nag Hammadi library?
Yes.
So there's something in Gospel of Thomas. It's the first thing that Jesus says in that is, "Those who learn the interpretation of these words will not experience death." And I have often, I totally get what you're saying. I've often wondered if that's what he means by that. Like, if you can achieve a mindset in which you understand what I'm referring to, you'll have that eternal thing that you can return to, and you actually don't, because it's eternal, like what you're describing. In a sense, although philosophical, you don't experience death. You transcend death. But it's interesting because Carl Jung, in his view, felt that he proved, like, empirically, that there are elements of the human psyche which transcend time. And so it only stands to reason that in that case, some elements of us do transcend death, right? Sorry, I guess I'm on a tangent again there, but
oh, it's all good.
Isn't there a truth to that? What you discovered on that trip? I sound like I'm one of those news guy.
We'll get onto this, but this is the thing. Everything, it's easy, I think, from my perspective, to like tie things into my latest trips and how that how everything relates, because I certainly have views on what you just said, and I certainly agree with you that I have a suspicion. Whenever you get into the subject, first of all, you have to deal with identity, which we will deal with in the concept of what makes a person a person. But I do think that there are elements of potentially the human mind that can survive the destruction of a material body. But how I would justify that, I can't justify it necessarily through like a factual argument. I can only justify it through experiential information.
Well,
and
Carl Jung
conjecture.
proved through his study of dreams very well that people often know events that are going to occur before they happen.
Sure.
In their dreams. Like, it's a super common...
well, the idea of synchronicities, yeah.
Yeah, and all that. And now I think I may have died a couple times, and on each occasion woken back up, maybe in like some different version.
Well, yeah, this ties into the idea of maybe quantum immortality even.
Yeah.
The idea that your mind you can never be conscious. If the multiverse theory is correct and everything is a quantum level event, then your mind, you cannot perceive something in a situation in which you are dead. Therefore, your mind you will always remain conscious because you can only be conscious in the universe in which you have survived. Thus, you will never die. By that logic, but it's very, very, very twitchy. But even then, there might be other explanations as well. But anyway.
But I think they were a mushroom cult, just to go back to that Gnostic Christianity thing. I believe they were on mushrooms.
Well, I mean, on this front here, I mean, if you want to, there's a really interesting book talking about Amita Muscaria that points out that Amita Muscaria, whenever you cut it, it pours a bright red like sap. And you can bake it into bread, also known as via Ezekiel bread. So
they had a lot of ingredients in that Ezekiel.
One possibility is that the whole idea of drink of my body, drink of my blood, eat of my body, was Amita Muscaria or reference to it.
Absolutely.
Well,
the idea that he quote unquote turned some water into wine. I'm pretty sure that was mushroom tea or something. Like he just brewed up mushroom tea with.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what kind of that wine. That's all they knew. Like that wine, man, whoosh, really got me.
Yeah, maybe.
Can you imagine being high on a psychedelic 4,000 or however 2,000 years ago without any context of knowing what it was, and just you just think you were sick or something. Like that's all you would. That's like the only thing you'd be like, I caught the flu or something.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's very interesting. I think that the loss of psychedelics from our society has been one of the most tragic betrayals of like human history.
I don't think we've lost them. Have we
no,
lost
no,
them?
not really. No, we haven't lost them. But their kind of official persecution or prosecution has been very unfortunate.
So I mean, do you agree with like the general Bill Hicks take on that? That it's simply out of convenience because it's inconvenient to have a population asking the kinds of questions that you start asking. People start asking a lot of questions when they're on those things.
From Nixon on why the drug will happen. Well, if you want to know the exact line, there's a really interesting quote most people don't know about. and this is the quote that blew the mind out of So there was a guy, let me just find it correct, researching drug, asked him to state blah blah blah. So there was a guy called Nixon's advisor, who started off the drug war, was a man called John Eichmann. He was the former domestic policy advisor at Nixon, and he was asked by a researcher who was researching drug prohibition policies. He was asking why the drug war happened, and this is the famous quote, and it's really it's not well known, but this is the quote that just made people, like, whenever they hear it, go into stunned silence. You want to know what this is really all about? He asked with the bluntness of a man who, after a public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had nothing left to protect. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or the black, but by making the public associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night in the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
See, that's why I like Nixon. That's the weird thing about Nixon. And it's the thing about the Republicans I actually like is they tell you straight to your face exactly what the hell they're doing. And they're like, yeah, we're doing evil. Here it is. But the Democrats do as much evil, if not, maybe not. They do actually more, I'd probably say more evil, like, per capita. Especially if you rope in some of the weird West Coast and Washington, D.C. and New York sex stuff. And they don't tell you the truth. They lie to you. They tell you that it's all in the name of the good of, it's in the name of the good of everybody, the common good.
Sure.
So at least the other ones tell you the truth. They're like, yep, we don't care about poor people. They just tell you right to your face. They're like, nope, don't care about them. We like rich.
Right. To return off the tangent back to the original. So, San Pardo I did. Then I tried Salvia Divorum, and that became like a nightmare trip in which it was kind of like I was in a, like when you get into an elevator and there's like mirrors on both sides and it kind of goes into infinity. It was kind of like that, and I kept falling through the mirror into myself.
Dude, let me tell you my Salvia trip I had. First time I ever did it. I was on a couch, and it started off with some weird minor hallucination. I'm gonna skip over that. I woke up, opened my eyes, and saw myself in the third person lying in a hospital bed in an all-white hospital room with a monitor up in the corner, with displaying a video of me running up a flight of stairs and opening the door at the top, and then only to find the bottom of the flight of stairs again and again and again. Very similar to what you just described. Super similar. In any case.
And the only thing I think that saved me from pure insanity in that was I remembered a song from the Beatles, or lyrics from the Beatles, where they said, relax and float downstream, it's just not dying. And that I just kept like remembering that line and being like, look, I know I'm not dying, it's okay.
And it only lasts 4 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Only that caused me to have like a bout for like 2 hours. I like triggered a kind of episode of derealization in which everything felt wrong. Everything felt wrong.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and it was so horrible.
I know exactly what you mean.
You'd be talking to somebody, and you'd be like, oh shit.
I have two questions for you about that.
Go for it.
Salvia, have you ever actually smoked the straight plant, not the extract? Completely different.
Interesting.
So I recommend it. It's a dream herb. It's really light. You would never have any intense experience on it. It's like a little dreamy, a little euphoric. It's like smoking Palo Santo or something. Like one of those herbs or like a sage, any other sage. Just smoking some sage. Other one, real quick interjection. So the next day I had the same hallucination, but there was no TV. It was just a Satori experience. It was all white light. And I think I came to the conclusion at that young age that was what I experienced on Salvia. I just hallucinated all the other stuff. But I actually just saw bright white light. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Go on your psychedelics. I like this story.
So the next thing I tried to do was at university, and this was about 6-7 years ago, maybe a bit more, hard to say. I'm a really big fan of Terence McKenna, and specifically I'm a big fan of the heroic dose methodology.
I
The
agree.
idea that the issues with psychedelics comes about from the transferal and the kind of going from a normal state to other. And the way I liken this, and I've talked about this before, is psychedelics can be viewed in this way. It's like you're walking into a cold ocean at the beach. And if you walk in, and the water's rising, you might freeze up, you might slow down a bit, you might be like, "Ooh, this is cold," and maybe you stop and go back because you don't like it. But with psychedelics, you can't take a step backwards, you can only go forwards. And so imagine you're walking forwards and then you're like, "Oh, this is a bit weird," and then you try to step back and you can't, and all of a sudden you panic. The other option, of course, is just to dive in, get the transference over, and you're fine.
Right.
So I took 9 tabs of acid as my first acid experience.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on the dose. Really, it's really hard to tell with acid what
Yeah,
a quote-unquote
it's a
hit
lot.
can be a lot of different micrograms. And
Yeah, 900 grams at like 900 UG. So yeah, it's strong. And my perception of time. I first of all noticed that things in the corners began getting a bit weird. And we had some really cool music on, and I really got into that, and it was all good. But I kind of a few interesting things happened. First off, time began to become diluted. So I had this real strong sense at one point of a time, not time loop per se, that came on a different trip. But I certainly experienced talking to people that they would slow down and they would speed up again like that.
okay.
I also saw
time elasticity, I guess I call that.
I also saw people buffering. So
Sure.
and so that was fascinating. I also found that I became I don't know, sensations just became so much more interesting. So I had a different fur hat on, and I just had the fur. I got the fur hat off, and I did it at one point like this, because I was just and because it was fur, it felt like it was breathing, and I'd bitten into something alive. It was so fascinating. And really interesting experience, very fun. Time kind of broke down. I forgot who I was. I forgot where I was.
So a little ego death?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, but not compared to what I've had later on. But I didn't. I had no memory. All I knew was I was in a place that was safe. But I beyond that, I was I had no clue, because I was just completely just being blasted out by Pink Floyd music.
Sure.
And it was fascinating though. And then
It reminds me of a quote from Peter Pan, which I find to be a very psychedelic analog.
Sure.
I think that person took some kind of psychedelic, but there, to die would be a great adventure.
Sure.
It reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think that part of the euphoria I've experienced on psychedelics is allowing myself to experience something close to death.
Sure.
And be okay with it.
Yeah.
Just that simple.
I still think that trip,
oh.
even though it's 9 grams, is one of my more tame trips. Ever since a certain event happened 2-3 years ago, everything's become very much more complicated. But we'll get onto this in a minute.
Okay, well, I have to pee.
Okay.
Give me
I'll
30 seconds.
I'll give you some time.
Give me 30 seconds.
I'm gonna log into your stream and chat to your chat.
Okay. Yes, and I'll be right back, chat.
Let's chat to his chat.
I do. I've been holding it for a minute here.
Okay. Let's chat. There you are. Boom. Dun, 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 dun. How you doing, chat? So I'm Mr. Bournbastic. I'm a chess streamer. Check me out. I do awesome content, but I also do other things as well. As you see, we have some interesting, cool views, and I have wonderful melancholic tones and a wonderful moustache. Aslandi's here, cool chap as well. Check him out. You know? Nice guy. I had no clue that he had such visionary experiences, I have to admit. I'm enjoying this. I'm really enjoying this. I didn't think I would. So I wasn't sure how I'd approach it, actually. It's very good, though. Ooh, it's a weird thing myself coming back on the audio there. Yeah, though, man. Very crazy times. Now, I hope your evening's going well, chat. I hope it's going well. if you've got any interesting comments you would like to throw out there on YouTube or elsewhere, if he's throwing on YouTube, throw it out there and I might respond. I'll try to respond. I'll keep an eye on his video, because why not? Why the hell not?
Okay, thanks for that. Chat's
No
been
worries.
quiet for a minute.
They have been quiet.
They said, though, if you didn't see, they said some stuff like, this whole stream is too smart. And then Alpha Chat said, yeah. But I think he liked it when he said yeah because I said something about, like, not liking hate speech laws. And then
Sure.
that one's really popular. That's
Yeah,
encouraging.
yes.
I'm glad. I know I'm way off now. Back to our early conversation. Anyway, you're on psychedelics and your journey. I'm curious here. So let me recount, make sure I'm in the right spot.
Yeah,
You took
go
9 hits of acid. You had a transcendental experience, I guess I'll call that.
Yeah.
Or transcendent. Let's call it transcendent, maybe. And then you've moved on to some other stuff. So what did you move on to?
Well, as I said, like, there's a continual theme. There's a few themes that go through my stuff. There's actually, I would say, one theme that goes through it later on that I didn't realize at the time. And after reading Jung, I kind of understood what I've been doing by accident, but we'll handle that in a minute. So, carry on, did some other trips, did some other cool stuff. Over time, I had trips where I would, like, see an overlay to reality, like this,
Sure.
It's like I would liken it to like a gel, a translucent gel that covers things, like a layer,
Sure.
and it would have geometric shapes in it. And I would see like entities occasionally, like these tiny translucent spiders with a tiny red dot in the back of them
Okay.
that would wander across the
Oh,
gel.
that's
and
very normal to me.
yeah, that just wandered across the gel. They were quite harmless, but they
Mhm.
would just wander across, feeding off it.
So have you heard of the
And,
Scintilla telescope?
The what, sir?
Scintilla telescope? I'll bookmark that. Come back to it later.
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay, but so did all that, and then I think the next interesting trip that I recall, apart from the next interesting trip I recall was probably the accidental acid party trip, which I've recounted before. So there was a friend who wanted to try it acid for the first time, and I happened to be able to acquire some, and so I was like, look, I can, we can do this and that'd be fine, but I know how trips can be. If you would like to bring some of our other friends over to keep you company, get a good environment going, it's your first time ever taking psychedelic, feel free. It's not a problem. So it ended up being like a house party of 9 of us, 8 of us there. And they had some drinks, they had some chilled stuff. And around 11 o'clock, I went out and there was an outside fire, and I used to live on a farm, so there were 2 whole fields and a very beautiful place. And I was like, look, if you want to sleep at all, or even have a chance of sleeping, it's probably too late even now. You need to do this now. If you do it any later, you're not going to get any sleep.
Right.
So she was like, okay. And so she took, I got a tab, she took the tab, and then as I gave her the tab, other people sat around the fires were like, what's that? And so I was like, well, the reason this started was because of this here. And they were like, oh, can we try some? And so it ended up being 7 people all on acid who had never done acid before, and me. And I was like, okay.
But I thought you took
felt it
9
coming
hits of acid. Oh, this was the 9 hits of acid.
Yeah.
Okay,
Only
okay,
7
okay.
of them took
So we're
it,
still
2
on the
of them
9
were-
hits.
Yeah, 2 of them were too drunk. And so I was like, okay. I felt it coming on, and I went upstairs. And until that point, acid for me had always been very much like on the earlier trip, the time dilation one. I had an experience at the end of it where I would have music in my head, and I could take a song and break the components of it down. So I could take the drums and make it sound
that's
like
me
it's
at all
coming from the right
times.
and the left, and I could
It's
alter
called-
them individually.
There's a name for it with composers. It's called night terrors. It's called like a composer's night terror. I have that. I have a
Interesting.
symphony going on, and I have all the parts. Am I gonna get them down? I don't know. I'm kind of tired. I'm trying to get some sleep. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So I know that one
And,
really well.
Until the point, it had all been very electric. And
Mhm.
then I went, and this is, I think, the turning point in my trips where they began to become far more shamanic, archetypical, and probably extremely more powerful in certain regards. But I went back up to my room and I was meditating, and this was just at the point where I was beginning to develop what I would call my methodology, which I still do to this day, but I haven't managed to haven't done it recently, partly because where I'm living. But the idea, so I sat there and did that, and as I closed my eyes and breathed, I felt really calm. And it wasn't that my thoughts were hard to follow. There wasn't this sense of spiraling into infinity. And what acid I think does at a lower level, I'm positive actually now looking at it, it does, is there's this kind of, I would say, playground of ideas that happens, and it's infinities and spirals. And I've likened it before to a wine bar, like a really crystalline wine bar where everything is really beautiful and you stare at it a lot, and it's like you get really into things. But it's not. It's very different from a Samperdo trip. And
I've never done the only psychedelics I've ever done, all of them are all tryptamines. I've never done a peyote. I've never done the one is not a tryptamine, the salvia. Yeah. But all the rest, I guess, except for in absinthe, there's a thing called, what is it, thujone?
Sure.
I think that's not a tryptamine.
No.
But yeah. Anyway, I've never tried one.
It's quite interesting.
I want to get that toad. That toad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you could buy one of them in.
What's it called? Oh, this is illegal. Maybe we're not supposed to talk about that.
Oh, well, no. You're allowed to talk about things that are illegal. You're just not allowed, of course, to be like, I'm going to do something illegal.
Oh, yeah, and I don't endorse any illegal activity.
Agreed, exactly. Stories from past. And so, the thing that happened is...
Good thing we got that out there.
Exactly. The thing that happened is that so that happened, and then I saw a landscape below me, like shifting sideways, and I had my hands like this on my chest, like that. And because acid like messes with perception, I didn't like realize the difference between my fingers. They all kind of fused into one, and I could feel like all the muscles on my chest like contracting and expanding again. And as the land was going below me, I realized that what I was perceiving was a bird. I had gone through the eyes of this bird, and I could feel the beating of its wings, and that was why I was feeling this muscle. And it saw a rabbit on the ground below it, and it dived down, and I felt like the wind fly by me. I felt the dive, and I felt catching this rabbit in these talons, bringing it to a nearby like tree branch, or like what do you call it, like a bit of tree anyway. And it sat there, and I remember it pecking at this rabbit and eating it and its flesh as it was still sort of alive. And I felt like the taste of meat in my mouth. Wow. And so at the time, I was like, this is incredibly fascinating. And this is I really kind of want to carry on and see where this goes. But I also kind of sighed, and I was like, but I am a kind of being a host of like, I'm a host here, and there are 7 people downstairs, none of whom have done psychedelics before. I should really find out what's going on. I haven't heard
now, did you identify a bird, or was it all purely...
I think it was some form of hawk or raptor.
But I mean, I mean like in your world around you, did you like see a bird up in the sky?
No, not the time. So I'm pretty sure that was occurring in the day, and it was around nighttime. So I don't think it was the same area.
Different time.
Yeah, it was fascinating getting into the mindscape of a mind head of a bird. And that's something, again, which occurs a fair bit with shamans as well.
It's actually shamanic practice, and even in the druidic practice, it's not. There's books I've read in those Masonic libraries about that, where they talk about. It's like so funny to pick up one of these books, like where it's like cultural and magical practices of the druids.
Yes.
And encyclopedic. There's like nothing even remotely theoretical in the book. It just goes through as it just lists positive statements about these ability to control weather, ability to morph into different kinds of animals. Now there's theories that are decent, like maybe part of what they would do to morph is make a really good animal skin from an animal and keep the head on it, and make like a hooded, or like tricks like that. But some of these things, there would be no trick for how they were able to call in a fog or a storm.
So that's a concept in Greek theology called theurgy. And it's this idea in Imblinkius. And Imblinkius is a writer who I really have kind of adored. The idea that if you ever want to experience what it's like to be a bird, what you probably want to do is dress up as a bird and and cover yourself with signifiers that tell your mind you are a bird. And then
that's what we do here. That's so funny. Our Pacific Northwest, one of the main dances is to dress up like a bird, and they put their arms out and they like fly around they dance around the fire, and it tells all kinds of cool stories. That's one thing I'm so thankful for, is that the Pacific Northwest is one of the only areas where native culture was preserved. because it was the end of the. They're one of the only people who didn't get moved, right?
Sure.
There was nowhere to push them to. It was the end of the whole deal. So they stayed close to where they lived, and they're growing up, even in like our public elementary school, like the first grades. We were given those the stories from those cultures, as well as like visiting different places and like learning about sort of naturalistic elements, like the cycle of life and the salmon spawn cycle and stuff like that, and like tying them into a sort of more holistic, by which I mean not entirely materialistic, worldview. I am very thankful for having as many complaints as I have about all the milk toasts and namby-pambies in my culture. We got a lot of good out of it. We're just a bunch of mama's boys is the thing. So many of us over here. We're just super soft.
Sure.
Super softies. It's funny you say that I'm rare to meet, but in this area, you'd meet a lot of people like me.
Fair.
That are around my age.
Fair. I mean, in Britain, it's kind of unusual. It's kind of unusual. Although I am like slowly like tapping into that like vibe of people. It's just I don't know, they're hard to come by a bit more. I think
you'd have fun at Burning Man.
Oh yeah,
you should go check out a Burning Man.
Oh, Burning Man would be fantastic. But before we get on this tangent,
okay.
Right, it's all good. It's all good. We're getting there.
I'm glad you have a sense of direction here.
They go. I know. I'm fairly good at bringing conversations back. I'm used to like talking to people where, including myself, I watch myself. I'm really so used to it. So I go downstairs, and one of my friends spins towards me, and she's like, "Stephen, the bathroom's all filled with hippie shit." And I was like, "Cool." And as she says that, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" is playing, and so I'm just there nodding, being like, "Okay, it's clearly kicked in." I go inside, and like one person gets caught in a time loop because one person is really into a Gorillaz song and keeps playing it on loop. And so his mind is like melting, being like, well, I've heard the song like 1,000 times. And like half of them go into like the field, and I keep going up a specific route to check on them. And there's like a vet up there who's digging her hands into the earth, being like, I feel it's the life of it. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. And so I put on like a top hat, and I put in some like cards in the top hat, and I like embody like this jester-like vibe, and it's really cool. And the guy who gets caught in a time loop turns to me, he says, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" And I was like, kinda.
I didn't know it was going to be the song. You're the guy who put it on.
Yeah. And so all this fun stuff happens, and that was an interesting trip. But that, for me, was the point where psychedelics and acid ceased to become a really electric experience, and instead became one where things began to become a lot more shamanic. And over the course of a number of experiences, I began to develop this methodology, whereby I would have a shower, and I'd do some visualization work, and get myself into that mindset. I would really try to make a break between more normal time and then psychedelic time.
Sure.
And then I would meditate, and I would take something whilst meditating, and as I felt it come up, I could thereby control both the kind of set of it, so my own psychological mood, and also like panic, etc., heartbeat rising. Also, I could control it through relaxation. And then I would go into the garden, and I came up with this whole little vibe. And I only realized whenever the trip that happened like 3 years ago, what would happen. But I would have a Russian hat, and I would have this fur hat on, not this one, but a different one. And if I had it in my right hand or left hand, I wasn't looking at it. Because it was fur, it felt like I was holding a dead animal. And I would have like a staff with me as well. And so it'd feel like I had like a spear, and I had this animal. And so I would get rid into this mindset of a hunter. I would wander around the garden, and it'd be great. And then I would put the hat on, and I would like suddenly feel everything around me, the whole world, and I would kind of embody the animal. So I was playing around with the theme and the archetype of the hunt and the hunted. And at the time, that was really fun. And then came the event, the experience that happened, about 3-4 years ago now, 3 years, where I went into the garden and everything was normal. And I was then chilling under some grapevines in the garden, and I got this really weird sense of something else being there. And I was like, this is unusual. Okay, what am I feeling here? And as I was trying to figure out what I was like feeling, a kind of image flashed into my mind of a picture I'd seen on Google of Dionysus, the Greek god of ritual, madness, intoxication.
That wine dude.
Yeah. And so I was like, and I suddenly had this horrifying realization and self-identification, because I was like, oh shit. Because in the picture, it's a smug picture of him with this cup of wine, smiling in this kind of smug fashion, just staring at them. And I had this horrifying realization that everything I'd been doing had led me to this moment, and that this had been some form of intentional trick by something. And I got this, and I was like, shit, I'm sat underneath these grapevines. Those are like, he's a god of wine. He has like shoulder length hair. I have shoulder length hair. He's the god of ritual and sanity. I've developed this into like a ritual point of like madness. And I was like, oh fuck. And I had this, I just sort of somehow got into my head that whatever I'd encountered knew that I knew, and it found it really hilarious. And so I went inside and I put on, I developed by this point a kind of system. So, but twice by this point in my psychedelic career, I'd not been possessed, but I could go onto like my bed and I would just sort of like surrender to emotions that would come my way.
Sure.
And so like there was one occasion where I really wanted, just began to like, I began needling my bed like this and there, and I kind of like moved around like a cat. And I just was like, I don't have to do this, but fuck it, let's see where this goes. So I got into the mindset of a cat. And it felt like very feminine. It was very unusual. There was another one with a crow. But anyway, so I was like, I'll go into my bed and I'll like see what happens. So I put on this song by a band called Dimorphia Nympha, which are a band that do renditions of Greek music. And they have a rendition of the Orphonic Hymn to Dionysus, which is... It's very rhythmic.
Yeah, check that out. It's a song.
Crazy.
Hey, what's up, DZ?
Yeah.
You know, just to go off on Dionysus just for a minute, there's an interesting archetypal element there. And I think it's because I associate Dionysus, of all the tarot cards, I actually associate him with the card, is it the Empress? Yeah, the Empress. And it's a lady, and she's very of the earth. And she, you know, there's a very feminine earth quality to the Dionysian archetype, but it's like it's a masculine persona or ego experiencing and overtaken by the beauty of the feminine, like the archetypal feminine.
Yes, I would definitely say so. Yeah.
Drunk on, not, you could say drunk on pleasure, but I think that's a bit cliche. It's a bit more like drunk on earthly, on earthly materials or something.
Yes, I understand.
Lust.
It's an unusual concept.
There's a sexual element. And actually, it plays into the Jungian concept that one that gets misused, because people use the term libido as it's specifically a sexual thing, which is more of a Freudian perspective. But the Jungian perspective is more that libido is simply psychic energy that you would use for anything, whether it's of a sexual nature or otherwise, because there's a lot of other things you can use libido energy for. But yeah, that's just like... It's sad how many of his concepts have just been sort of dumbed down. It's like one of the saddest things to me is when I hear people say collective unconscious.
Yeah, well, I'll just say...
I'm sorry, collective consciousness. It always makes me so sad when I hear people say collective consciousness. I'm like, oh, man.
It's one reason you should read this book by Peter Kingsley, because he goes over how that happened. Like, he pointed out that there was a statement Jung made where he said... I found myself in a sea of lava and the lava organized itself, or something to that effect. And his secretary changed that to, I found myself in a sea of lava and I had to organize it. And it's just subtle differences like that. And she didn't mean any harm. It's just that it fundamentally changed everything.
It organized him.
Yeah.
Although that probably comes through by our modern translations we've done into English, because it kept getting translated.
No, I agree.
So I started off when I was 18. I read a collection of essays and lectures of his that you are probably familiar with, called Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious.
Sure.
And I didn't understand a word of the thing, and I went ahead and just read it again. Well, no, I would do this, right? We all know that thing where you're reading and then you start kind of daydreaming and thinking about something else, and you've read 2 pages of text but you didn't comprehend any of it. So I would read Jung when I was quite young, and I sort of just bashed myself with it until I understood what the hell he was talking about. So I read that book, and I realize now that was actually not the best introductory. It's very technical, the majority of that text. There's other better, I would recommend other ones as like an introductory. But in any case, I went on as sort of a devotee, you could call me. Like I said, I read everything published.
I think that's fantastic.
That there is. And most of them I read several times. I had the same approach with foreign film.
Sure.
I would rent 8 foreign films a week, watch all of them, but the ones that really stood out or like were memorable to me, I'd rent them again and watch that one again. You know, to like, I guess so today I could tell you what they are if you ever need a good recommendation.
Oh, I'm always up for recommendations. Just DM me them. Just DM
yeah,
me them.
Dude. I know like if it's 1945 to 1975 and from a European country, there's a good chance I've seen it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, totally do so. Totally do so, man.
That's me though. I'm all over the place. I'm like an air freaking blimp of thought. Ooh. Just all over.
Yeah, it's good. No, it's good sometimes. It's good. It just shows like that everything's interconnected, man. That everything's interconnected.
It really is, dude.
It's so easy to draw like yourself into tangents because everything appears interconnected once you go down to a certain level.
And then it does that Dionysus thing goes into a Jungian concept of the anima. Yeah. And the feminine unconscious archetype within a male person.
And that ties into like yin and yang and all the vast concepts there, and it just it gets really deep because you're dealing with fundamental forces.
I can bring up Jordan Peterson there and say that culturally that's one reason why he's misunderstood, because he's coming from that Jungian perspective. Because you'll see a lot of the criticism of him is like, well, why are you calling this thing feminine and this thing masculine? And he's like, they don't understand that's just literally the field of study and theory and of science that he's like coming from. And so they don't have that language. It sounds like he's some kind of like, I get why people think he's some kind of whatever, like a bigot or something, but not really. They just don't understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
He was one of the funniest to watch get called names though, because of a tame and nice guy. I mean,
well, without going on to like too much tangent again, it's like I do love the I do love the BBC interview where it's just her going, so what you're saying is,
no, that's not what I'm saying.
He's like, no.
But no, that just beautiful moment, man. I watch that thing still. I go and watch that clip where it's him saying, he says, it's right that you have the ability to make me uncomfortable with your words, because otherwise how would you ever be able to find out what the truth is? It's been rather uncomfortable sitting here and having you ask me all these questions, but it's what you're supposed to do. That's your job. And she's like, you're not sitting there saying, and then she just goes into silence, and you can see like the gears turning, because she is putting it together. She's like, oh shit, like he is telling me the truth right now. I don't know what to do. I'm being told the truth by someone. And I think in her profession, that's actually pretty rare. Because when you're in that, that's the world of spin and inflammation. And spectacle, and simulacra. And all that,
but to return, I love this. This is great. I love this. So, where were we? We were at, I was in the garden, played it there, and I saw a vision of like a cave as I writhed in pure ecstasy to this tune. I saw a vision of like a cave and 2 women in whites killing like a goat. And I came out of this and I was like, this is madness. And I was like, this is one of the most powerful emotions I've ever experienced, and I need to like tell people this. And I never intended to like stumble into anything like this. And so I went outside, and this is where it became like the closest thing I've probably had to a supernatural event. But I went outside and I was like slightly confused. I didn't really know what to make of this all. Like stumbling into something, thinking that this thing had all been set up, and it was all fascinating. But I got into the garden, I was looking at the sky, and I remember saying, this can't be real. This can't be happening. Is this really what you want? And as I said, is this really what you want? There was a flash of lightning in the sky and thunder, and it began to rain on me, like heavily. And the timing, I was like, so I remember, I then went, no, this can't be happening. Is this really what you want? I asked again. And as I do so, lightning flashes again, downpours. And so I'm like,
That's
I go
Zeus,
inside.
baby.
Yeah, and as I go inside, and what makes it weird is that as I cross the threshold, it completely stops raining, and there's not another thunder like striking the entire night, as far as I was aware. And that there, the time, just the downpour, and then suddenly going inside and it just stopping, like.
That's the thing. It's like this fatal misconception is that Zeus is some made-up thing that's outside, and what's overlooked is that all of these things actually represent parts of you. Like what I can tell someone, like the god, whatever that sun god is, Zeus, or what's the guy who's Hercules' father?
Yeah, Zeus. I'm pretty sure it's Zeus.
No, Zeus is the other guy. Well, there's a different name for him up there, right? Or not Hercules. Sorry, no, the guy who's Thor's father. Thor, same guy, but up in
Odin, yeah.
Yeah, Odin. All these are whatever the sun god is. You know, this is how I try to explain it. There's a theoretical or real point where you end and everything else begins, and that's what that archetype is. It's the entirety. It's the entirety of everything that makes it so you exist in relationship to something else. So that's that. No. And that was why it makes perfect sense that you say you and call it you, even though it is partly the God in you or whatever. It's that psychological liminal space between where you end, the limit of where you exist and everything else. And the thing is that space clearly it doesn't end where your skin ends. Sure. And there's a transcendent quality to our being, which we grow somehow further than our bodies, right? So like I don't know. That's what that reminds me of, is that fundamental archetype of the sun god, and why that's associated with the Numen and Numa or wind, as tubes of wind move about the earth, and as also how erected monoliths and monuments are phallic and masculine in nature, and the sun casts a shadow on them that moves throughout the day, that is the spiral of the earth through space and all that. I think that all sort of is bedrock human psychology. Like that kind of stuff is just at the absolute, as far as I'm sure there's a lot deeper, the wells of the vast abyssal plane of the void, the cosmic void. I'm sure there, but somewhere that's around where I've identified some of the bedrock. But that's all I'm just rehashed Jungian bullshit anyway. Which, by the way, people don't respect Carl Jung, by the way. I just want to throw it out there. I'm not pleased about that, because I kind of spent a lot of time idolizing that dude and reading all of his books. Yeah. I hear ya. They said he was a Nazi. Remember people say he's a Nazi?
Yeah.
But did you see that thing that came out? Another declassified CIA thing?
Go for it.
About him? It said that he was actually an informant. He was a spy for the U.S. military during World War II. And he sent regular psychological assessments of all of the leaders of the Reich, of like the SS and stuff.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so all those people who were calling him a Nazi for all those years can eat a big one now.
Yep.
I love pulling out that competitive nature. It's like, yeah, suck it. Just like an American competitive streak that we have.
Yeah, why not, man? So, like,
you guys are way more polite than we are.
Oh, we are. we are. We're made more.
You're like, good show, mate. Good show. You guys put a good performance.
I think it's to our detriment, though. I think ever since we've lost the Empire, it's just like the only thing we have left is tea, and we're just like, well, who knows?
I think that when flying the English flag becomes an act of hate speech, that's when you've probably got to reevaluate your cultural identity. Now, I have a theory about what's going on politically real quick. This will be really quick. I think that these lawmakers are actually so fundamentally, to the core, absolutely afraid of Islam and like Islamic terror attacks, that their solution is to just lie to the public and appease Muslim groups by lying so that they don't blow stuff, like do anything. Because remember there was those like attacks in the subways and stuff, and some kind of stuff going on back in the day. I think your government is just so cowardly. They're like, we're not going to use our intelligence or our use of force to protect the public from an actual threat. We're just going to lie to the public. Because I know even the numbers on like the people who are found guilty in those grooming gang cases and stuff, and that shit is insane. And it's been going on since the 80s. And you go and look at it, like where it started with Sikh communities, and the Sikh community has been like ringing the alarm bell about that for decades now, and never anything has been done. It's super suspicious. And then they've actually found that members of parliament and police and all these are actually in cahoots with these people and stuff. I mean, it's bad. It's bad corruption. So I think that's probably one problem. To deal with.
That case, look up the Beast of Belgium. There was a case in Belgium that nearly destroyed the Belgian government, and there was one person who has never been arrested to this day, but his partner was, even though he was like a key part of the case. And what made it so interesting is it ended up causing like one Supreme Court justice member of the Belgian government or the Belgian court system to be arrested because he was involved. It ended up having like 2 police chiefs arrested, a few members of parliament, and the guy to this day maintains that the reason he's never been arrested is because if he's ever arrested, information will come out that will destroy the Belgian government. And he's just told interviewers this bluntly. He's like, yeah, no, I did like traffic people and I did sell them to Americans and other people. Yeah.
No, there's actually people who are whistleblowers from military, specifically who run the communications about like high level classified. There's like cables that they use for real time communication that are like private networks.
Yeah.
And there are whistleblowers that have at least alleged that high-ranking Pentagon and officials around the country are regularly in communication about human trafficking, like underage sex slaves and all kinds of stuff like that. Like it's a regular matter of course on those communications. I don't know how dangerous it is to talk about this stuff. I know that high-profile people always die mysteriously whenever they start to talk about it.
I think we'll be okay.
We're okay, but high-profile people, you better believe it. That's it. I've seen so many people go down in my lifetime.
Yeah.
We had one recently where it was Chris Cornell and the singer from Linkin Park. They both committed suicide apparently, but they had just started a charity. Like an NGO for young children who are victims of sex trafficking and child abuse and sexual abuse and stuff, and then they just like both go down right as it launches and it never goes anywhere. That kind of thing, where it's just like, or there was that guy with the curly hair. What was that guy's name? Isaac something. He was an actor. Yeah.
I think I know the one.
Isaac something.
There is an actor who has had like an attempt on his life and has been trying to go public and being alleged.
Well, this guy's dead. Isaac Cappy. That's his name. Okay. He was an actor and he had a show where he was he was doing live streams on YouTube, and he was talking about all this kind of shit, and then he was found at the bottom of a bridge. And this like all these people just die, dude. Yeah, or the guy Jeffrey Epstein gets arrested and doesn't have a chance to spill the beans, and he just all this over and over again. Mysteriously dies in his cell. There's no video. The video camera turned off.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious because the amount of because there's so many intel operations going on. Because the FBI's investigation, the CIA's investigation. Jesus, the investigators themselves. I have no doubt they understand how infiltrated and screwed their own system is, which is why they're being so quiet about it. I have no clue what will happen when they finally finalize that eventually. It's going to take them years because the amount of counterintelligence and
we don't know how, but we just keep making more branches of counterintelligence to try to police the other ones we already made that are running haywire. They're just running.
Yeah.
What's that called? Rogue. They've all gone
Yeah.
rogue. The FBI's gone rogue, and the FBI went rogue in the '60s with Hoover,
Fighters? Oh, Hoover as well. Yeah.
and then I mean before the '60s really, but the '60s is when he really started to go like off the deep end, and then and then the CIA went rogue. They kind of started off as rogues, and then that's because they were supposed to be like a spy thing, and then now we have the NSA, we have Department of Homeland Security, we have ICE, which they're one of the only ones who actually technically does their job still. They haven't gone rogue yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, we're gonna have ICE going in after the FBI and the CIA, just to get the documents what we need so we can we get the document. I mean, that's the thing is like, look, I'm not one of these people who's gonna sit here and tell you that England and the US have done no wrong, and that our system of government is flawless, and the evidence is in that we live in a perfect society where everyone's taken care of efficiently. I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone that. I'll just say it's the only system I know about that has a legal language that actually protects human rights on any level. And so until someone else can come along with something that has that quality to it, I'm pretty much on board with the liberalism thing. It's like one of those, if it ain't broke, it's still running. It's a beater car, but it's still getting down the road.
Hey man, I hear you.
And then someone else is trying to sell me like an electric car, but I already know that there's no place to charge it.
Sure, I hear you.
Like I can. That's my analogy for communism. Like, I know enough about communism to know it is a very bad idea. The same way that I know enough about taking Percocet and drinking alcohol at the same time is a very bad idea. Like, there's certain things you just know are very bad ideas, and you don't tie yourself to a truck and then send the truck over a cliff. This is a very bad idea, right? So I think that's safe, and I think it's safe to say that about the fascism thing. And then what I'm curious about, and this is the same question Jordan Peterson had, and I'm wondering if you actually have an answer, because no one's ever answered this question, is what is a safe, reasonable limit to place on the left to say where they have gone too far that's acceptable? Because he used the example of on the right, the second they start to talk about racial superiority and stuff is a very good red flag to know they've gone too far. You already know they've gone too far if they're in that, at least from a liberal perspective, right? Of individualism being a core value, right? So
probably whenever they begin to attack the concept of truth itself, whenever they begin to
of
say
language.
that there is things
So
whenever they
changing
begin
the
to-
definition of racism to mean that to mean the same thing as systemic or structural racism, but to be interchangeable.
I think it lies somewhere, though the precise point is hard to say, in the deconstruction aspect of truth. Whenever they keep their critique to industrial issues and to concrete terms, it's fine. It's when they get insidious with like cultural concepts, that's when it gets dangerous, in my view.
So so it's it is a type of purity, but it's not racial purity, it's economic purity or something. Here's actually a question. So here's a theory I have. A lot of people on the right, and I'd say the moderate right, even people like myself, use a term, in quotes, the left.
Yes.
And I think this term, I have a definition, a singular definition of this term that is not entirely political. I think it actually defines an economic class. And these are generally well-to-do, they're college-educated people who know the proper lingo and code terminology to be in with the cultural movement of like, say, woke culture or intersectional feminism, stuff like that. And that is actually, I believe, an economic class. It's journos at BuzzFeed. It's people who are the diversity hiring consultants
your perspective aligns with classical Marxist theory on the matter. So most of them were intelligentsia.
Yeah, intelligentsia. That's what you call them.
They would state.
I call them blowhards.
Yes, intelligentsia and part of the vanguard. Yes.
What's that Thomas Sowell quote? I love it. There are some notions so absurd that only intellectuals can entertain them.
Yes.
And I think that is a very poignant truth right there.
Yes. to drag us all the way back
To psychedelics.
Well, do you want, we can keep going down this route if you like. It's just
No, I like
finished.
it. I'm having
Never
fun. I
finished.
don't know how I'm gonna edit this video. I'll probably just slap it on in its entirety. This is great.
I never finished. So yeah, so the rest of the trip became chaos after the whole dynasty thing. Whatever, cool. In the morning, I realized that material possessions meant nothing. That everything I owned didn't mean anything. I loaded up my harp. I loaded up all my swords and weapon collections into my car, and I drove. And I drove up to Exeter first, and then I sold my harp. I sold some other stuff, and stayed at friends, and ended up a couple months later working in Belgium. I had been meaning to go to Amsterdam, but I ended up going into Belgium and working at a charity there for like 2 to 3 months. I got into a load of festivals for free. I made some great friends who I still talk to this day. It was probably one of the best summers of my life. And I just wanted, at the time, I was still like trying to figure out what was going on. But then a series of events happened, other trips occurred. The next interesting trip I had was a couple of years later, because I wanted to get into Amsterdam and I wanted to sit down and read the Bhagavad Gita.
I love that story. Arjuna, the warrior.
Yeah. Yes.
And Krishna.
Yes. Where it's just so weird. It's like, yeah, your best friend is God. Yeah. It's like, yeah,
coolest
just kill your
one of
friend.
it. What is it? The Upanishads, I think. I like.
Yeah, the Upanishads, the world's longest poem in the world. Oh no, yes, the Upanishads are not. It's the Mahabharata that the Bhagavad Gita is from.
That's the
which is the longest
Mahabharata.
poem.
I believe it's. I don't remember which one it's part of, but there's one about the snake creatures called the Naga.
Yeah.
And they battle these Naga, man, and it says they battle them into caves, and that's where like they were retreated into. And I always wonder if that's the same Alpha Draconis originator, or of origin Alpha Draconis origin people that are said to live here on the earth or have visited.
That's an interesting one. I hadn't considered that. And Hindu myths are interesting because they have flying steel birds.
Yeah, they have a lot of UFO shit.
And they use sonic weaponry in like staffs to destabilize people. But I love reading the Ramayana or the Ramayana because that's the greatest thing to read. Because you read the Ramayana and it's it's great. The quotes in it are so good because it's just demon guy prays to God for immortality. God gets a headache, so gives him immortality. He invades heaven. The gods complain to Super God, whose house lies outside reality. Super God it says, well, I had a real big headache. He wouldn't shut up. I can't really remember what I gave him. It's fine though. He can be hit by mortals. And then he's like, yo, you want to just smoke some ganja with me and drink some soma? And the gods are like, I mean, all our homes have been taken over by this asshole demon that you gave, but I guess so. Let's just like chill. And then it just goes wild. And it's like
it's great.
Meets, like there's a line in it where he meets Maya, the god of illusion.
Yeah.
And Maya has his daughter there, and it's so British how he refers to Ravana. He's like, oh, hello there, Ravana. You must be Ravana. It's like, your many heads are very handsome. Your arms very original. Yes, I've always loved that line. Your arms are very original.
Yes. Each one of them.
He's like, would you like to marry my daughter? And Ravana's like, yeah, sure, why not? And they're definitely a creepy git. But anyway, there's also a line of like where the bears teared up the trees and smashed the demons with them. There's great lines.
See,
like
that's
that.
nice.
But anyway,
they were warrior classes, man. They had people they were
Yeah.
talking about. Same with the Sikhs.
yeah. But
Badass.
I went to Amsterdam Park. I sat down. And this is where I began to have synchronicities. So this was my first mushroom trip, my first true one. And I sat down, had the Bhagavad Gita open, and as it's just coming on, this black guy on a bike just drives by. He just drives by on his bike.
Yeah, see, that's okay.
I'm just nodding at people. I'm like, yo, hello, And he sees me from like across this pond on Bournbastic Park. He just goes on over and he's like, excuse me, I see you need some marijuana oil. And I'm like, I'm pretty chill, man. He's like, no, I can see it. You need some marijuana oil.
He's the best salesman I've ever heard of.
And he's like, it will help you.
I'm gonna try that.
Just drive up to you.
You need my CD. No, you need it.
He's like, He's like, it will help you. I can see it. And I was like, thanks, man. I'll like bear that in mind.
So he's like saying you look stressed out.
I don't know. And he was like, and he was like, he just was like, yes, good luck.
Maybe
And
he's
then he
just
drove
racist.
on. Then he drove on, and I was like, okay. And the last time I'd done like shrooms as well in like that same park at the same spot, I'd encountered this hippie, and this was like when I'd done
Oh.
a really small dose. But you can tell sometimes when somebody else is on something, because me and my friends had done it previously. And
Yeah,
a
you can
really
tell
tiny
because
dose.
their eyes are all dilated.
Yeah, but it's what I don't.
And
count
they're
it as,
staring
like,
off into weird directions awkwardly, like they're trying to avoid eye contact.
I don't count this trip as being like an actual trip. I count this as my first true like mushroom. But he came. We were sitting listening to music, and he comes on over, and he just gets onto his like. He crouches down, and he just stares at the ground, and just begins nodding to himself. He just begins nodding to himself, and then just like giggles and smiles slightly, and then just looks up, and our eyes meet, and I just nod slowly at him, and he nods back, smiling, and I'm like, yeah, okay. But
Well,
anyway,
oh, man.
so that
One of my
happens.
craziest ever acid trips, I was probably about 17. I did exactly
for
what
it.
you're talking about. I took a shower, first thing. Next thing, I did something weird. I got a robe on.
Okay,
I grabbed a big metal mixing bowl,
good.
and I filled it about a third of the way up, maybe a quarter of the way up with water.
Okay.
And
You
I
tried to
took-
scry.
And I took it, hi Nimmy, and I took that that bowl into a living room, and at that moment, serendipitously, through synchronicity, a ray of sunshine, as pure and direct as possible from an odd angle, through a nearly closed set of curtains, came directly onto the center of the carpet in the center of the room. I took a seat in a a cross-legged position and held the bowl, originally intended to make noise with, right? Because when I tap the bowl and move it around, the water changes the
Oh, yeah,
tone. So I'm doing that, but this ray of sunlight's hitting it, and I got really lucky, and it actually made a real deal. This, I didn't hallucinate it, because my girlfriend came back and saw it. She wasn't on acid. It made a real deal hologram, 3D hologram projected out of the bowl from the light hitting it in the right way, I guess, and just the shape and how the water was. So it was like projected in a full 180 degrees around the entire lip of the bowl, which I'd never. It was still like I was only like 17, so this is before you could like get a hologram. Like I'd never seen a hologram in real life like that. And then
Nice.
so that's my prep up, like you're talking about, kind of thing.
Nice.
And then
Yeah, I like it.
I go off into the world, dressed, obviously, and for no reason at all, I begin writing in iambic pentameter poetry in paper on a notebook that I had with me and pen, just going. You know, all this kind of intellectual or stuff about like freeing yourself from burdens and stuff. And then I go and I sit down next to this tree, and this is a real weird experience because 2 motorcycle police officers appeared only feet away from me without making any sound whatsoever. And then I was only alerted to them because I heard the sound of their like walkie-talkie thing, and then like looking at me and then talking to each other. And then they like rode off, and their motorcycles were really loud. And to this day, I do not understand like if they did a Matrix thing where they like actually just like zapped into reality, or if they walked their bikes up like really quietly to me or something. I don't know. It was really
Sure.
weird because I had a full view of where, there was no reason. They snuck up on me. It was weird. I did not like that one. But I still have the iambic pentameter poetry. It was something like, if one walks with all they need, will be found great harmony.
Seattle in the finals.
Yeah, we in the finals, Cornet. No, that smart team, the Sounders.
Ooh,
We won.
congrats.
Dude, let me tell you about this. Football, man.
Go for it.
And then give me the rest of your timeline.
Yeah, I'll drag
so
you into
it was,
okay.
we're in the semifinals just the other day on Monday. We are down 2-0 with only 15 minutes left in the game. And we managed to score 3 goals in 15 minutes. It didn't even go to overtime. We got the win before it even went to that extra period where if
Nice.
it's tied.
Sure.
So it was quite, I know maybe you're not big on sports, Soccer?
I used to be on the British fencing team. I was
Oh,
the fourth
fencing's a
highest
sport.
rated
That's a hard sport.
I was the fourth highest rated fencer in the UK. For
Okay, well
like,
there you go. Soccer's in my blood. I love soccer.
Soccer's great, yeah, man.
Anyway, back to the psychedelics.
So
I'm high.
yeah,
I
but
mean,
no.
hi.
But like it's so I'm there and then it opens up and like all this cool stuff happens and yeah, I everything becomes really interesting. The Bag of Gita's opening and doing its own thing and like I'm letting the wind open it and there's a really beautiful like cherry blossom tree I watch. And then I go to a nearby fountain and things get like a bit strange. So first off, I begin hearing like thoughts of people. And I'm pretty sure what I actually was what I thought people would think if they knew I was tripping. It was like, some of it was negative, some of it was not. It was just random words in other cases. It was bits like that. But as I'm sat there, I begin to notice weird things. And Terence McKenna used to say that you would never want to do mushrooms in public because anything could happen.
I don't like doing mushrooms in public.
No, because the synchronicity goes through the roof and it becomes weird. And so as I'm sat there, I look around at this park and there's another like pool of water, like a pond nearby. And this guy just goes up to the pond, takes off all his clothes, and lies down and just begins posing nude and the person takes.
I think
the,
that's
so I'm
happened
like,
to
okay.
everyone. That's happened to everyone I know. That happened to me.
So I'm like, yeah. So I'm like, okay.
There's always that fucking narcissistic dude who goes up naked
So
to the fountain.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, art project, whatever. And then these guys with placards turn up or something, and they begin clambering over like the statue in the middle of this fountain I'm on. So I'm like, okay, so there's art project there, and there's these protester people here. Okay, cool, not a bit weird, but fine. And then so then I move, and I go, and I'm like, oh, we're seeing some weird stuff. It's like getting a bit like the vibes changing slightly. And as I'm sat by another tree, out of these bushes comes like this like film trolley thing where like film students like pushing it, and it's this whole like camera setup, and they're just pushing it along, and I'm like, okay, another art project maybe. I'm not quite sure. And then this like homeless guy wanders out of a different bush, and it's clear that he's not recognizing that everything's fucking weird as well, because he just like looks around in like mild confusion at everything for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, because mind you, this is Britain. This is a land of order and peace and harmony and like.
Yeah, this was Amsterdam. This was Amsterdam.
Oh, okay, never mind. They're weird there.
And he wanders over, and he's just like, "Can I have some water?" And I was like, "Yep." And so I just give him water, and we're just like, "This is weird." And he's like, "Yep." I was like, "How's your day?" And he was like, "Well, I live in the bush." And I was like, "Okay, you live in the bush?" He's like, "Yeah."
So you met Diogenes.
Yeah, I met this guy who lived in a bush.
He's Diogenes, basically.
By, like, film crew. Yeah.
Or like a modern day Diogenes.
Yeah. So the rest of the trip gets like interesting, all cool stuff happens, whatever. Anyway, recently, however, so let me think. After that, when was the next like really fascinating one that occurred? Oh, there was the whole incident. We're nearly getting there. We're getting to the last like 4 big trips, I think.
Okay, good. No, I'm just kidding.
So there was like.
It's my Seattle humor.
Me and my friend took some more, and normal events occurred, but there was a really kind of like linked experience vibe that went down. And so the weirdest component of it was we went out into the Midwife field, and it's kind of like we were talking and we would slip into a conversation that we didn't mean to, that was antagonistic. So we kept on like, how would I put it? He would begin like
Cain and
saying
Abel, huh?
certain things, and I would begin saying things, and then every like 10 seconds or so we would like snap out of it and be like, why are we like getting antagonistic and like prepping to like fight each other? And it was like this whole conflict between like the Apanesian and the Dionysian, and that freaked me out. So I went inside, and then he was sick, and that made me think he was going to die because the trip had become a bit paranoid and bizarre. So then
what was it? I don't know which one it is, if it's mushrooms or acid.
This was acid. More
Okay.
acid, yeah. And so my heart rate spiked because I thought my friend was going to die because he'd had like some pasta earlier, and because of the tomato sauce he vomited up, essentially his vomit was red.
Oh.
So I assumed, yeah. So I
Freaked you
thought
out.
he was going. Yeah, it
Oh,
freaked
your
me
door
out,
opened.
and
That
so-
freaked me out, dude. You got a freaking ghost.
Oh yeah, this one. Yeah, he's the one.
You can't kill God.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, is that to
And,
Nietzsche? Are you telling that to Nietzsche? Dude,
yeah,
that story is hilarious because after he released that book called The Gay Science, which is a stupid name for a book. I'm sorry.
True. No, go ahead. It is.
He said in that book that God was dead, although there's more context to it. He was criticizing culture. But
Yes.
right after that, his life, I mean, it wasn't great already, but his life went really bad. It was like,
Oh, yeah.
he what's that called? Jinx? Have you ever heard of that term, jinx?
Yeah.
When you he jinxed himself so hard. He did not knock on wood or whatever he needed to do.
Oh, yeah.
Because, what did he do? He got kicked by a horse. It gave him an ulcer or something. And that
that
just
he went
led to
mad,
his,
yeah.
made him mad and dead. He died.
Yeah.
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 So take a lesson from Nietzsche. I know I'm saying his
Yeah.
name wrong, but I don't do German.
It's right. It's right. It's right.
That's
I'm
that's
like
the Americanized version. I love how everything we say is like Nietzsche.
I'll do this one. There's one other story, and then there's the final 2, and then that's it. And the final 2 are really connected. So, but anyway,
excited.
heart rate spiked to 194, not 194 beats per minute.
Well, you had a monitor on?
I got an ambulance in because I
Oh.
thought my friend was gonna die, and then they checked my heart rate, and
Okay.
they were like, "Oh shit!" And
Wow.
so they got a second
That's a fun
ambulance in.
call.
Yeah, exactly.
My friend's dying.
And so
He ate tomato
that-
sauce.
Yeah, I didn't know at the time, but I mean, they turned up and they were like, "What the fuck's going on?" And so that occurred.
I keep interrupting. You go ahead.
Right. So I think apart from that, the last 2 experiences I've had are probably the most interesting, but also the most.
Wait, to finish the other one, I want to know what the medics said.
Well, me and the medics.
They told you you're fucking high.
Well, one of the medics turned. The medics turned up, and my friend was rolling. I mean, who passed by? He was rolling on the carpet saying, "I'm God." So I'm God then. So they were like, "Okay." Sorry.
Saying,
Oh yeah, I can't call too much of that.
"Whoa,
yeah.
I have one for you that reminds me of your freaking hat."
Go for it.
My buddy, super into psychedelics. I knew him all these years, and I hung out with him a lot. There was one night on acid, he lost his jacket. And
Okay.
I kid you not, and I'm a witness to this. 2 years later, we were on acid in his living room. He reached out into thin air with his
Oh,
hand
shit.
extended, and his jacket appeared in his hand. He
Woo.
straight jacked his own jacket through 2 years of time space somehow on acid.
Woo-hoo.
It was nuts. This
That's
same guy
wild.
would grow phalaris grass to do alkaloid extraction for the DMT.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, I saw that.
Very interesting.
That's a real
Oh,
thing.
that's cool.
It's a lot like the lost time thing, I think,
Yeah.
that I went through.
So
Yeah. All right, you go.
yeah. No. So the last thing I'd cover then is let me think. Where we've covered that one there. We've covered all those ones. Oh, in Blinkius. So I mentioned in Blinkius earlier the idea that if you want to have an experience of what the classic way of describing it is, if you want to understand what an orange is or what the true essence of orange is, wear nothing but orange, go into a room that's
Right.
orange, put on any songs
So
about
it's
orange.
the polar opposite of anthropomorphization.
Yes. Yeah,
It's
you
the
basically want
inverse.
to-
It's the inverse
yeah,
concept.
Yes.
Where you make the
concept
human
called-
into the thing instead of the thing into
Yeah.
a human.
and then your identity latches onto it. So I went down to a river and I got dressed up. I had a pointy hat, I had robes on, I had a deer-footed staff, I had a crystal ball, and I decided I wanted to try and invoke the concept of a wizard and become a wizard. And that was a very fun experience. I can't really say much more apart from it was interesting.
Like a Merlin?
I got
Like a
two-
Hermes?
There were two,
Like a John
yeah,
Dee?
Yeah, exactly. I got 2 ideas from it. 2 phrases came out of that I'll never forget. The first was, "I'm either insane or I'm correct," and the second one was that a shaman knows what a shaman is. That experience also showed me, and I don't know how to describe it. I kind of got a perception of the humor of reality,
Okay.
and it's so hard to put
Yeah.
across because I
No,
know
the idea of a Loki, the trickster god. That
Well, it's
archetype.
That, and also, I also really understood the concept of 0 and 1. So I was like, from the perception of the absolute, everything is singular, right? It's it. But from its perspective, whenever it looks at the parts of its body. It's like it looks at a finger on itself, and that finger thinks it's a separate thing from all the other fingers and the whole body. So from the perception of one, two thinking it is different from one.
Now you're getting into tarot.
Hilarious.
You're getting into tarot and I Ching and all that, and numerology in general.
And the idea to it is utterly hilarious. And I just got this sense of humor.
The comedy of numbers.
I was just looking around at things, and I just saw the giggle and everything as I realized the kind of the humor that the world has of thinking that everything is separate from itself, when from its perspective it is not. But,
right. That there's so many multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things. It's the final.
The final one is probably the most mind crazy one of all. And this is the one that, well, there were two. There was one that occurred a few days back, and then there was one from many moons ago. But so I take my psychedelics, I'm chilling as ever, and I get this really strong like vibe coming into place, and I feel down the back of my spine and through my head like this energy. In particular my lower spine in particular, but also rising up. And it kind of like pins me into place. And I get this real strong sense that I've had before of this kind of like feminine sort of energy or presence. It's hard to describe it beyond that. And it's very playful. And I'm putting on this cool music, it's all fun, and there's like this conversation that happens whereby, and I physically feel like as opposed to like sitting like this, like being pushed back like that. And so it's more like a pressure around my neck and head area as kind of this thing that just like holds it in place. And fascinating conversation happens. It gets very interesting, but there's a point in the trip where I was deciding to chase, as opposed to playing with this idea or thought or whatever it was, this archetype, I decided to play with the idea of, or try to find the source of my awareness. So I begin chasing my ideas, and I separate myself out from, I begin trying to observe the source itself. And as I do so, everything in my brain, I come to this point, and I think I found the way to like this realization. And everything in my brain screams at me to stop and not to have a look any further. Because it's destruction, it's death. And I get this real strong sense that this thing also doesn't want me to like go down this route. And I'm like, that's really interesting. That you're willing to let me play around with everything else and get into this here and hold.
I call those the Watchers.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I would classify what that thing was, or that feminine energy, as in Hindu theological terms, Shakti. I can't pronounce its term, but the sort of feminine power.
There's a term for it in Gnostic scripture, which is Sophia, the goddess of feminine wisdom.
Yes. And so, but I'm like, that's really interesting. So I decide to dive into it. And it's essentially just this void. It's just complete blackness. There is nothing there. And I dive into nothingness, and I perceive nothingness, and everything becomes nothing. And then I come back out an instant later, having seen into as far as I think you can go. Just nothing. And as I'm sat there, I announce to the void, I'm like, that's really interesting. And I announce out there, and I'm like, is there anyone else here? Is there anything else? Or is this just nothing? And as I do so, I suddenly feel this presence, as like this attention is drawn to me. And again, I'm like forced back into my chair. And I see, as my eyes are closed, because this entire trip's like this. Yeah. I see like the outlines of like 4 or 5 people in darkness, all like tall old people with like beards, the kind of classic shtick. And they like try to reach into my head, it feels like, to like probe it to figure out what's going on here. And similar to because I've developed at this point a methodology for dealing with that there, namely kind of the idea of the transference. If somebody encounters something, I now just identify as it, and by doing that kind of like consume it. So I mean, there is a differentiation, or like a discernment, right, where you that's immediate. I think it's mostly intuitive. You don't consciously do this, but there's a level of intuitive discernment you're going to do where you identify something as being some unconscious contents, or an external, something external.
because
Yeah.
both things exist
Yeah.
independently of each other.
Yeah.
And so, that's actually the work of a shaman in its essence, is to understand those things and to be able to hear the music, the ikarus, they're called, that flow through space, through the material world.
Sure.
The tones and vibrations that connect the different dimensions
Yeah.
to each other. That's the work of a shaman. I love that the definition of a shaman is someone who knows how to interact with other dimensions, basically. It's
Sure,
someone,
yeah.
and it's basically what you're describing. But
Yeah.
the thing that you and I don't have the privilege of was being raised in a tradition by an expert and having all that knowledge. But by the most base definition, I too do consider myself a shaman in that I understand to some degree a lot of plant medicine, and I can hear and interact with spirits in lower dimensional realms,
Sure.
or what I call like slower dimensional realms.
Oh yeah, I mean, from what you were saying, it definitely seems that way in comparison to like I generally speaking, all of my experiences come as a result of like diving real deep on those substances, as opposed to non sort of states achieved outside of that. Although I am building a sensory deprivation tank, so hopefully.
Well, psychedelics certainly played a huge role in in just the development even of my worldview, of being such an open-minded person. And there was actually something I thought of during your last couple trips. You're saying, where it's when even people who aren't coming, people coming from different psychedelic perspectives, when it comes to some of the socio-political issues that are coming around now, appear to have conservative views on things, but it's actually because of some experiential or some neuro pathways that person has made where they have an understanding of a thing.
Sure.
For instance, with identity, the term identity, people coming from a Jungian perspective or even other backgrounds or psychedelic ones would have an association like to the Greek persona. And people from a Jungian background, there's a differentiation between the self or the true self and the ego, and then ego complex, and then identity complexes, and all those things. Like, not to be too unfair, but the term identity is kind of loaded in that respect, because it actually does infer a disorder, like a psychological disorder, like it's an identity disorder. So any time that someone comes along and is like talking about identity from that particular perspective, it's a little bit, I don't know the nice word, but abhorrent or something. It runs contrary to what is known to be true through like research and investigation and knowledge.
I hear you.
You know what I mean? So it's like same with ones that were, like I was saying with Jordan Peterson, like that disconnect of not understanding the difference between man and woman, male and female, and feminine and masculine, and not understanding that archetypal context of what the words feminine and masculine mean, that they're not actually confined in any way to any sex or orientation, that it's actually a more universal, you know what I'm saying? That there's a more universal aspect to it. And I guess what I'm saying is you don't even have to have read a bunch of Jung. A lot of people who have taken psychedelics have also come to these conclusions on their own, and they do not jive with the modern day like neo-Bolshevik word games that intelligentsia, as you called them, like to play. And it's interesting because it brings up that class differentiation too, because people who aren't versed in the lingo and the like code structure of those word games are the object of their ire or whatever, or their like those are the people who they take their aggression out on, and actively. And it's so funny when they talk about punching up and stuff, because these are people of high socioeconomic class actively punching down on lower, like, working class. It's the same in England. You see it all the time, I'm sure. Now, what, am I trying to make too big of a point of this? Maybe.
No.
But
no,
it's
no,
like,
I mean,
it's something
something-
interesting. Because it
it's
doesn't
something
make you a right winger to feel that way. In my case, it actually makes me more of an empath or whatever. Like, I'm having more empathy for the working class.
Yeah,
In this
I,
bizarre contextualization that I'm offering.
No, I agree with you. I mean, like, the intelligence, you always have a disdain for the working class from either side because they think that the working class are acting contrary to their own interests, and they essentially have this perception of them where they think that they are too stupid to understand what to do with their own good.
How just demeaning and, like, degrading is that? It's so odd to me that, see, there's no moral superiority to me that comes with that kind of mindset. Like, I never understand how people in the same breath will essentially say what you just said and then say that it's because they're a good, moral, upstanding person. It's like, it's just an odd, it doesn't equate, the logic is off there. But I think this is a general, like, pathos in our, okay, here, how about this idea? You've heard it before. Language is its own living system and has either a symbiotic or parasitic relationship with our species. Or my theory is that it was symbiotic up till a point, and now it's becoming... That the idea is essentially language is the AI. That whole theory that AI will subsume... It's actually the idea that it's a virus from outer space.
Interesting. I don't know how to feel about that. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily... I think it's a good way, potentially, of viewing it.
It's like a sort of sci-fi...
Yeah, I mean, certainly language has... certainly language has power. Certainly it has the power to directly affect how people perceive things. That's an interesting one. I don't necessarily think that language is, at least at a basic level, parasitic. Unless... I mean, if you really wanted to get down a super route, I guess what you could say is that if the contents of the mind exist somehow external to the material body, and language is a development of the mind relating itself to the body or to the material world, then you could maybe perhaps say that in some regard the meaning behind a word exists in some platonic fashion, similar to how, like, some mathematicians think that think that numbers exist.
I call that the world of human ideas.
Sure. And they infect humanity with different strains, which are different linguistic,
ideologies. Ideologies are the perfect example of, like, what's that word? When a gosh, I'm blanking on the term. It means when something it's a flawed reasoning. It's circular logic, where something is because it is.
Cartesian circles, yeah, I know what you mean.
Ideologies are like the perfect example of that with language, where it's like the justification for it is built in, and that is why it's an ideology. That's to me, that's what differentiates an ideology from a principle. Because a principle doesn't require any intellectual reasoning. It can exist entirely on its own.
Yes, I agree with that, generally speaking. The premises to ideologies tend to be rooted in nothing more than itself. I mean, the concept of truth itself is very risky, partly because of Agrippa's trilerum. The idea that if you say all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, in order to justify and defend that statement, if somebody asks you why, how do you know that, you have to propose a further proposition. So you have to go, well, I know all men are mortal because I see that men die. At which point you can just ask them again, well, how do you know you can trust that? And there are only three conclusions to such a line of reasoning. One of those being that all truths in the world support each other. The other one being that you can never find a single self-evident fact to build reality from. Or the final one is that there is, like, no end to it.
Right.
It's, well, And so that's the way
why I
of
think
defeating basically any philosophy class.
language is certainly a tool that we've used well for a long
Yes.
time for logic.
Yeah.
For instance, we can make true statements so that we know things that are true. For instance,
Yeah.
the statement, "It is difficult to craft a sentence which is true," is a true sentence. Like it takes great care of duty and attention to the words and their order and meaning in order to even say anything true, which is true. So we can start there. Which is language has given us that ability, right? We can start at principles, first principles.
Yeah. I agree.
So I always push back on that like nebulous, what's his name? The guy who wrote Return to Quetzalcoatl, that 2012. Because in the end of that book, he's talking about this, and he's like, a lot of postmodernists have challenged the idea that there is objective truth, and I just think it's a waste of time. It's just a fancy.
I mean, the purpose of philosophy should not be to focus on objective truth. It should be to find eudaimonia, e.g. the good life.
Right.
The idea of, here's the thing: grammar and grimoire, a book of magic, is
I know that one.
etymologically. Yeah. Grammar.
I love that.
To spell is to cast a spell.
Yeah.
Yep. Spell something.
And to cast a vote, you cast your vote.
Is to use your words to like. And this is something that Novalis,
incantation too.
Yes.
The canteen.
Is that a essay is. I really hate essays in philosophy because I think they've ruined it. Because what they do, an essay is this. It's you put an argument, you put a counter argument, put a conclusion. And it's not about truth. It's not about making you smarter. What an essay really is doing is kind of tricking you into thinking the same way the author does. Because it's like, oh yes, I see that you've developed all the counter arguments, and this is a reasonable conclusion based on the counter arguments. Therefore, I agree with it. If you come out of an essay and you're like, I disagree with it, then they've not written a good essay. Which is why, from a philosopher's perspective, philosophy is about wisdom. Now, if you trace the etymological terms of that, wisdom means knowing how to proceed. Knowledge is seeing how something works. So you would be wise if you could see how to get knowledge of something. Philosophy, though, has very much become about acquiring knowledge of the world, not about how to think before that. And Novalis points out, like, Novalis wrote an entire book in fragments, as did Holderlin, because he hated essays for this reason. And it took me ages to understand some of the stuff he says. Like, he just made random statements in his book, like, we must sow the seeds. We must sow the field. And then he just moves on to a completely other unrelated, sentence. And what he meant by it sows the field is, from his view, it is the task of philosophers to sow seeds of ideas in people's minds and let those ideas germinate within them themselves. And it's why he proposed in the Romantics that art and poetry were superior mediums for developing wisdom than ethics.
You can't have philosophy is useless with only one philosopher. Like the upside of philosophy is that you can get two philosophers in the same room and have them make arguments against each other to maybe get truth or to get closer to the truth than maybe either of them were beforehand.
This is what Alan Watts says on the matter, is that philosophers love arguing because without anyone to argue with, they'd never know what they thought.
Yeah. But the thing is that we've lost the religious element here entirely. Because a philosopher isn't a priest and never will be a priest or a shaman. And people should sort of associate the shaman with the priest, more than they do.
This is why in Blinkius was so interesting and others, because theurgy as a concept was kind of that crossroads over, I suppose. It's also interesting between what Socrates did on this front and Plato in particular. Like, Plato specifically killed what's the philosopher who jumped into the volcano?
I want to talk to the chat real quick.
Yeah.
Chat, I see there's some of you here. Welcome to the Auslandia Show. It's Weird Wednesday. We have weird conversations about weird stuff on Wednesdays with special guests. Tonight we got Mr. Bournbastic. Epic streamer. Check him out. Go give him the follow. Does chess. He does crazy survival games. He does every kind of game. He'll play actually whatever. He's a no holds barred kind of bardic streamer. Coming to you from England, the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
If you don't already follow me now.
Yeah, follow him. He's good.
Give me a
He's good.
follow. That's an
Yeah.
order. And
He's a good...
go and follow Mr. Bournbastic. 2.
Thank you. Thank you.
And join our Discord after I get the link.
He is an awesome person. I can confirm that, chat. He's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo. That's why we have Weird
Question.
Wednesday.
I have a question for you. Have you ever read? Presumably you have. Have you ever read Carl Jung's 7 Sermons of the Dead?
Yep.
Oh,
Sure have.
You really have read everything. All right.
That was a weird one.
Yeah, man. It's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
very good. So I can't pronounce his name, but a philosopher who jumped into a volcano to prove he was God. He wrote a book. Parmenides, for instance, I think is the main one who wrote it. But yeah, Parmenides is the one I'm after here specifically. Parmenides wrote a book called a poem specifically called "The Way of Truth." And he talked about how he'd gone into the underworld, met a goddess, and then had become gathered the truth from her and returned from the dead. And this ties into Jung because Jung used to talk about how he had died and returned from the dead, and he also referenced him quite a lot in depth. But it's fascinating how Parmenides figured out how people would misinterpret his work linguistically inside his own poem. Because inside his poem, he talks about how people would misinterpret everything he was going to say, and he specifically actually lists how they will misinterpret him. And in the future, what do you know? People happen to do exactly what he said, because they're like, oh, well, he clearly was meaning this here. And Parmenides is there like,
yep.
It's so predictable.
He knew already, whereas most people just lament. Carl Jung lamented about the fact that no one understood what he was talking about. He would write about it. He'd be like, man, I'm bummed.
Carl Jung also intentionally lived a double life, where he tried to portray himself as both a man of the time and also...
That started when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Reminds me of Herman Hesse, too. Similar.
Yeah, Herman Hesse is an interesting one, yeah.
But it's similar kind of life trajectory.
Yeah. No, I agree. I find him very
Steppenwolf, you ever read Steppenwolf?
Oh shit! I'll tell you somebody who you should watch. Have you ever encountered? And then I'll probably wander off in a bit because it's like.
I bet it's getting late. I bet.
But have you ever watched any Frank Yang? Do you know who Frank Yang is?
No, I don't.
Okay. Frank Yang is one of perhaps the only enlightened people I've ever encountered online, and I'm pretty sure he is enlightened. He's a bodybuilder. He's a bodybuilder who have made for ages artistic kind of videos. He's known. One of his videos is Frank Yang, the Human Acid Trip, and he goes on to the reason he wants to develop muscle is so that he can mess with people's perception. And he developed him, and he found that the more muscular he got, the more he could mess with people, because the less they expected him to mess with people.
Whoa.
And so he went onto South Korea's train system and would get down to his underwear and just be like, I'm going to show you how to move every bone in your body. And then would just go down the train going like this. And he would stand outside a shop, for instance, and just greet everyone who came in the shop. And just be like, well, I work here. And the workers would be like, no, you don't. And he was like, yes, I do. And
wow, Jedi mind tricks.
He keeps on going on silent retreats for years, and he's done over 5,000 to 10,000 hours of meditation. And nowadays, he just makes videos on enlightenment meditation, reverse Vishpara. So he's like, yeah, this is how you generate the universe.
Yeah, go down to the earth kind of stuff.
Yeah, and he's like, this is how our reality is generated by itself. And you can see through the course of his videos, him going from just really focused on bodybuilding to his current, Zen Buddhist state where he's like, the self is nothing, there is no Frank Yang, there is no you, there is no me. When I'm talking to somebody, it's really bizarre because I realize that there is no them and there is no me, and I just sort of let the conversation happen.
You think he takes a psychedelic too?
He used to. He's fully talked about this, but he's gone way beyond it, he says. He says that the psychedelics are nothing compared to what he's capable of experiencing on an
So
every
we have
single
something
second.
like Kundalini.
Yeah, well, he talks about Kundalini a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it's that
Kundalini's-
he probably gets the Satori.
Yeah. Yeah. I fully, judging from what like I've seen of him, I find him one of the most fascinating humans around. I'll link you a video from him. What I would advise you do, first off, there is the video I like to show people of him is his least spiritual video, but also shows you the pure insanity of him. And then I'll link you another one, which is his most recent ones, and you can see the difference. It's interesting. But anyway, we've covered so much today.
That was a lot. I'm gonna slap
We've
this thing on
covered-
YouTube.
Psychedelics, some conspiracy theories, John Dee to an extent, the British Empire, my own psychedelic things, Carl Jung to an extent, language as a parasite. We've done some wild
Political,
political
psychological,
Yeah.
economic.
Yeah. The
realities.
trajectory of the West, fascism.
We didn't get into
communism.
hidden bases on the moon.
No,
we
didn't
hardly
get
got
into-
into reptilian.
Yeah, I like your idea.
Conspiracy.
I do like the idea you have though of the reptilians being from
I think it.
from the Hindu myths, being the Nagas. That's a really nice.
Well, that
view. I
explains
like-
that whole Hollow Earth thing. Now, I've always
Yeah.
thought the Hollow Earth actually just meant a network of tunnels.
Yeah,
it never
well, I
made
mean,
sense to me that it would be the actual middle of the Earth. That seems like a very bad place to build anything.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man.
Like,
I
I'm
mean,
just not. I'm not a freaking structural engineer here, but I'm pretty sure the real estate at the middle of the Earth is cheap for a reason, or it's just no one wants
Well,
it. No one's
this
going
thing,
there.
I'm really curious. This thing I think find really interesting with flat earthers, right, is that flat earthers talk about the ice wall. They talk about the ice wall, and I'm like, well, if you're
Dude.
so convinced there is an ice wall, go out there. It's not that hard. Just go there.
Fly.
And if they stop
Fly
you,
there.
yeah, if they stop you, they stop you. I will say this now, and your whole thing of like those like traffic cops matrixing into reality.
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, well, on the like more intense experiences, it's certainly the case that I can certainly get that I understand. I think at a fundamental level what that must have felt like, because even just like my last experience, it was so strange. I really got an impression that, and to an extent, I've noticed that I have a kind of mild paranoid streak to an extent, but I really did notice to an extent that it was almost as if I could, like, events happen.
They had motorcycles. It's not like they had bicycles. You know what I'm saying? They weren't bike
yeah.
cops. They had
Well,
motorcycles. These things are
Weird-
vroom, vroom.
Yeah, weird things happen, and you look at it and you're like, okay, I know what's up, synchronicity wise. Like, they're here because I'm doing this here, and even though they might like not know as people, it's clear that that's kind of happened because of this. It's so
I
it's
think
such
it
a
was
bizarre
some kind of god. I mean, I think
Yeah,
there is
it's-
like there's a grand architect. I really believe this shit. I think that
Well, do you think?
I think all
you-
those religions are closer to being
Well, I
right
mean,
than
All of them are derived from the Indo-Vedic
yes.
religion.
I think they're
Um,
more close to being right than people give them credit for.
Oh yeah,
Let's
man.
just say
oh,
that.
Yeah, I know.
I think there's an afterlife. I think there's a lot of different kinds of afterlives.
Have you
I
ever
think
looked into
people
it?
don't go away when they die. Like all the people I know when they died, they're not gone. I promise you.
Well,
I
I'm
would
definitely
know.
going to talk to you more. I'm really fascinated about things because you've done tarot readings. How accurate do you find them?
Oh,
When-
like
whenever you-
100%. Uncanny. But I told you I can also get into a trance state where I can call a card and cut it.
I'm gonna like talk to you afterwards. I'm curious about something, but at the same time, like I think that I can't remember my train of thought. Like we've covered so much now, man. I just agree with you. I think it's interesting. The whole subject area is fascinating. Oh, that was what I was gonna say. Do you know the whole like weird thing with the Green Man and mythology and that's one of the more mysterious ones.
I know about the green ants. I know
So-
about Gray Man.
So here's the thing. In
You ever heard of Gray
Arthurian
Man?
myth- No, but we'll
Okay.
talk about that before we head off. Arthurian myth, right? One of the weirdest stories in the entire Arthurian legends and cycles is
Okay.
King Arthur's at his court, and a green knight turns up, and he challenges one of the other knights to a fight. The other knight attacks him, cuts his head off, and the green knight picks up his own head, casually, defeats the other knight and is like, I'll be back in a year and we'll talk then more. And it's never explained why his head can talk when it's off. It's never explained why his skin is green or he is green. Now, you could be like, okay, that's weird by itself, but whatever.
Right.
But it gets on. In Islam, there is a man called the green man of the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And the weird thing about it is nobody knows in Islam what he is. They don't
It's
know
a
if
jinn.
he's a prophet. Well, there is some ideas that he's a jinn. Other people think
I mean, it
that
sounds
he
like a
is
jinn.
an angel. Yeah. Others think he's a prophet but he's green. And he has
I think it's a
green
genie.
Maybe.
I mean, just as a cultural
Yeah.
reference.
Yeah.
Just when
So
I'm a half expert. I've seen some of this kind of stuff. I know how to tell a jinn from a banshee. You know what I'm saying?
Nice.
Like I can
Yeah,
tell you,
yeah.
or it's like I said, an apparition. Like I can tell you an inanimate memory from an actual poltergeist or something that whatever the different kinds.
Yeah.
Because it's just like I said, it's just like reading something. Like if you know what you're looking for, it's not hard. Because there's really telltale signs for everything. Now, I have a weird guy I have weird ancestors in my lineage.
Go for it.
One of them's a guy named Royal Rife. He invented a thing called the Rife machine.
Okay.
And it's actually a thing that people still make and buy today, but it's like a sonic healing machine that uses sound vibrations to like to help treat cancer and tumors and stuff like that, and other diseases. So Royal Rife, and then I have a few who are like high-ranking Masons or into like occult kind of stuff, and then I have one line of my ancestry is we had a county in Ireland called County Creighton. And we had a castle in the whole 9 yards. But I don't know exactly why, but my people had to like flee. They had to like run. There were 3 heirs to that castle, and 2 of them died on their way out, and then one of them made it to Nova Scotia, and then they ended up like traveling through the U.S. to the West Coast.
Sure.
Some weird people. Got weird people in my lineage. Tell you, I went some Welsh too.
Oh, nice.
Which is, I think, I got a Welsh hairline, I swear, look. Looks like, what's his name? Gareth Bale.
Sure.
Same hairline.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Like, the only Welsh I know, weirdly, even though I live in Wales, is Dim Parker, which means no parking. And that's because I used to walk by a car park where I used to live that had the sign no parking on it every day. It just stuck with me, Dim Parker.
It sounds like it's a mix between German and English. Or
or
Dutch and
Welsh
English.
Is weird. It's such a weird one. I mean,
It sounds like Dutch, kind of, to me.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I mean, LL is pronounced th. I can tell you that much. LL
That's
is
language.
Yes.
Exactly. I'm really fascinated by the Sami people because their culture originated near like modern day Mongolia.
Yep.
And it spread all the way to what is now Hungary.
Yes.
Not Hungary anymore. Sorry, that was I'm a boomer. Hungary and Finland.
Yes.
The Finnish language comes from that Sami. I spent like a whole 3 hours on a Wikipedia thing that sent me to the Sami people for a while. That's actually pretty mysterious too. There's a lot we don't know about the Sami.
Sure. Yeah.
But they were as prolific. I mean, they had as big of an area as the Hans got.
Oh yeah.
Or the Huns. Attila, the Huns. Sorry, the Huns.
Oh, great quote from Attila the Hun, which was when he was asked about why, or I believe it was Attila the Hun, might be incorrect in this bit, when he was asked about, or what was one of the barbarians, it might have been the Goths, but they were asked about why they thought they could take down the Romans, considering how powerful and how mighty and how, everywhere the Romans were. And the baddest quote he came out with was, the thicker the hay, the easier the sowed. Or sorry, the thicker the hay, the easier reaped.
Right.
Which is a good.
Ouch.
It's like,
That means his arrow's just gonna work better.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. That's great.
Because they had
which means there's more kit.
They had horse-mounted
Yeah.
archers,
Yeah. It's like, oh shit.
which kind of fucked the Romans.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
Like that's
Now-
that hay.
Yep. Oh yeah. Right. Well, I'm gonna head off because it's.
Hey, it's
3:30
been a
in the
pleasure.
evening.
For real.
Yeah, man. No, I've super enjoyed this. I'm super glad I came on.
Be
we've
a
got
regular. We'll have a rotating,
Yeah.
and then sometimes there might be 3 or 4
Oh.
people. You know what I mean?
I'd be totally down for it. I'd be totally down for it. I think it's a really fascinating thing. And yeah, reach out to poke Uncle Trustleman on Twitter.
Hey, I'll give him a
Because
shot.
Why not? I mean, you've got nothing to lose by reaching out and just being like, look, we have this weird podcast. We talk about things.
I'm gonna get Styx, Hex, and Hammer.
Yeah, do it, man. I mean,
Why not?
Another guy who you could try and reach out to: Styx, Hex, and Hammer. Him. Jason, the guy who runs Uncultured. I'd have to check.
Oh yeah.
But he's another guy who you could reach out to. Yeah, it's a load. You should do it, man. It'd be
I will.
great.
I will. All right. It's been a lot
Right.
of fun having you,
Ciao,
man.
Enjoy. You'll
Ciao. Thank you, man. That was brilliant. Everyone, I'm gonna take a quick pee break. BRB. That was fun. What a fun guy. Jeez. Be right back, Nimmy.